Again, Snake, T-Rock, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Let's kind of break the ice, get to know each other a little bit before we get into some opening statements. Snake, you were just here about a month ago debating Kent. T-Rock, this is actually your first time on the channel. So why don't we start with you? T-Rock, again, thank you so much. A little bit about yourself, a little bit about who you are and why you find this topic so important.
Sure. So first of all, thank you, Donnie, for hosting us. Thank you, Taylor, for joining the conversation. Someone might say hostile territory for you, although I honestly hope it's not hostile at all. Much respect for joining the conversation on the creation ground. But yeah, so I've basically been a creationist all my life. Never really thought about it any other way. It wasn't until the last 6 or 7 years probably that I started kind of looking at the scientific aspect of origins. I just kind of took it for granted growing up that the creation was true, and I was pleasantly surprised by the boatloads of data that are available that strongly confirm biblical creation. So my job here today is to help affirm the faith of those that believe in the Genesis account, and also to give the skeptics some serious things to think about and consider their position. So that's good. And as far as my educational background, education and career background, it's pretty much always been in engineering and manufacturing, which I think is a really big advantage in these types of conversations. I think some of that will probably come out during the presentations. So other than that, I don't have any credentials anybody would jump up and down about, but I do have a tendency to look at things from a very practical viewpoint. So I think we'll see some of that here in a little bit.
All right, T-Rock, I appreciate that introduction. This isn't your first rodeo. You've debated this similar topic in the past with Conspiracy Cats, and that was definitely a must-watch debate. Snake was right. You're seasoned as well. This isn't your first rodeo. Actually, you're probably coming close to holding the record in terms of debates for your side. You're probably coming close to 100 now. So, yeah, how you been? What's going on over at your channel, and a little bit about yourself, Taylor.
Oh, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me. And I'm going to try out a new introduction here. So I run a channel called Snake Was Right. It's basically about skepticism and source method epistemology. Basically, how do we know things? It's about fighting pseudoscience, religion, flat earth, socialism, but I repeat myself, and poor reasoning in general. The theme of my channel is kind of forbidden knowledge, so that's the snake was right. You're not supposed to be an atheist. You're not supposed to question your own side. You're not supposed to be against the woke mob and the socialists, and you're not supposed to be a libertarian, and you're not supposed to question authority of any kind, really. I do, because any legitimate authority does not rely on authority alone. I'll throw in mainstream school in that too. I'm a crusader against religion, but I have a giant bone to pick with my own atheist community, which is infested with socialism and moral relativism. I was in debate club in high school, and I'm working on a molecular cellular developmental biology degree. I went to a Christian high school to find God, specifically, where I read the Bible and became an atheist. And I used to defend Islam, again, until I read their holy book, the Quran. Now I wish I had more Islam debates, because those are fun and I don't like it. I used to be a socialist and a Democrat, but thankfully I kicked that religion too. My essential mission statements are: capitalism is evolution, morality is objective, all ought statements are is statements, and knowledge of good and evil is a good thing. Thank you.
I appreciate that introduction. Snake was right. So that being said, I want to go over the format for tonight. We've got a formal, semi-informal debate. We're going to be starting with 15-minute opening statements, followed by 10-minute uninterrupted rebuttals. Then we're going to have a free-flowing dialogue of about 40 minutes where the debaters, T-Rock and Snake Was Right, will be asking each other relevant questions to the topic of the debate. Again, the topic is age of the earth, young or old. Then we're going to have 5-minute closing statements. and then an audience Q&A, roughly 30 minutes. So make sure you guys are tagging me with your questions at Standing for Truth, and that way I won't miss your questions. So why don't we get right into the opening statements then, gentlemen? Snake was right and T-Rock. One thing I think we forgot to do was decide who's going to go first. You both kind of have an affirmative tonight, so it's not old or young. Snake would say old. T-Rock would say young. So any preference as to who would start?
Whatever you guys think. Coin toss doesn't matter to me.
I can start.
Okay.
Did you want to do the formal thing where the person who starts also ends, or just do your normal thing?
Yeah, we can do that if you guys if you guys both agree to that. So Snake, you would start, then we'd have T-Rock give his opening, then the rebuttals, then the discussion, but then T-Rock would give his closing first, and then you'd give your closing last. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, if that's agreeable.
Sure.
Okay. Well, let's you guys are easygoing. I appreciate it. So we will kick off the debate with Snake was right and his 15-minute opening statement. Snake, what I can do as usual is give you a 1-minute warning once we get to the 14-minute mark, and that way you'll know to kind of start wrapping things up. If you need to share a screen, let me know, and we can do that as well. So go ahead, Snake. The floor is yours.
All right. 1 second. Okay, so today I'm going to have 3 main points. Try not to gish gallop. So that would be cross-confirmation of the dating methods, the deposition rates, and the heat problem that all preclude young Earth creationism, and in their own. And the first 2 are the main methods for proving the positive end of the side, the age of the Earth. So the history of this whole turn towards uniformitarianism, or as it's evolved to, is actualism. Basically, everyone was a creationist in medieval Europe when the sciences were starting to develop. Creationist geologists are the ones who overturned the young Earth flood model. That in itself should be telling that they thought there was enough evidence of the massive geological timescale to basically change their religious beliefs. They're still Christians, just thought the Earth was a little bit older. So first point, kind of simple, but it's about the deposition rates. In particular, I love the Grand Canyon because it's always a friend to the side of science. The Kaibab limestone layer at the Grand Canyon is 300 to 500 feet thick. So we'll go with the thinner estimate, 300 feet. And the deposition rate of limestone has been measured in ideal conditions, which are cool conditions, to be 3.1 feet per 1,000 years maximum. So doing some math, that comes out to 300 feet of deposition comes out to 96.8 thousand years. So over 32 times the 6,000-year-old Earth, 6,000-year young Earth proposed by young Earthers. This is why the young Earth just doesn't work. Just flat on its face right there, and that's the thinnest part of one rock layer, just one, almost 100,000 years. And every other metric basically confirms this, but this is a very simple way of doing it. So the way around this general aging thing, well, backing up for a moment, not only do we know this, basically the deposition rates, the formation of rocks, that's kind of how things started turning in the first place, but then the advent of nuclear physics let us test the radiometric age of things, and so the way around this is an ad hoc rescue device of accelerated nuclear decay, which I anticipated to be the focus of today's debate, at least my focus. So that brings me to my second point, cross-confirmation. Cross-confirmation is the gold standard for testing reliability in science. And, you know, putting together a prediction and a actual measurement, that is cross-confirmation, because you're using two different methods to achieve the same thing. But what we're talking about here is different elemental decay processes. Decay species are coming up with the same age in the same layers. And if that's statistically impossible, and it happens with every layer, and it happens uniformly, older and older and older as it goes down, and it just so happens every species has the same general timescale. In the same pattern, even though they have different rates of decay. So like some half-lives are millions of years, some half-lives are hundreds of thousands, etc., etc. So the fact that these rates are lining up to the same result is just a statistical impossibility. It's like proposing that every clock on Earth is broken or somehow inaccurate, and not just that, but that they all stopped and at this showing the same time, but that they each broke on a different day at the same time for hundreds of thousands of different days, just coincidentally. So that doesn't even approach how truly absurd it would be to actually believe in accelerated nuclear decay. So I'll explain without an analogy. These elements all decay at different rates, and yet they each cross-correlate to the same age, which means that your God has to have intentionally sped up this rate of decay at differential rates so that each element kept up with the apparent age of the other elements, even though they have different rates. So they would have to have different rates of acceleration, custom for each one. If God sped them up all by the same metric, the ages would be all off, the cross-confirmation would never work. But instead, God must have been able to adjust the rate custom for each element so that they appeared to be the same age per stratum. And not just that, but custom accelerated each element separately and differently in each stratum. Going down, they're all kept correlated. Custom, each element is custom, and each layer is custom for each element. So breaking the laws of fundamental physics, the fundamental nuclear forces, in these local areas only, and in a very patterned manner, for no apparent reason, because this is an ad hoc explanation. This isn't like part of the flood model until we get to the age of nuclear physics. So we didn't just see the acceleration of nuclear decay universally. It would have had to be local and custom for thousands of different rates, all keeping them up progressively to keep them correlated with each other. It's hard to physically explain how insanely absurd this is. Hopefully I did an okay job. So again, it's not like this was always part of God's plan. It's a response to the fact that the rocks are appearing older than they should for a young Earth. This appears to have no apparent reason or function or goal. What does this accomplish besides confusing scientists? The best and brightest minds of our ages. The better explanation seems to be that the flood fairy tale was told by people who had no knowledge of nuclear physics, which becomes an especially bad problem when we're talking about the heat problem. So the accelerated nuclear decay would have to be 750,000 times the normal rate of decay. So it's not just, giving it a little bit more juice. And again, differential rates, not all 750,000 times. That's the highest one, but all differential, all coordinated for some reason to make it look like it's an old Earth. So there is this thing called the Rate Project, which tried to overturn Constant Nuclear Decay, it's a Young Earth Creationist project. They said, quote, that they admit that a young Earth position cannot be reconciled with the scientific data without assuming that exotic solutions will be discovered in the future. No known thermodynamic process could account for the required rate of heat removal, nor is there any known way to protect organisms from radiation damage. And radiation damage being the least of our concerns here. The other quote I'll read from them is that the amount of heat produced could potentially vaporize the Earth's oceans, melt the crust, and obliterate the surface of the Earth. And I'll show the math for that. It's not even the potential. So we're just going to take the decay rate from uranium only and ignore all the others: strontium-90, potassium, cesium-137, carbon-14, which would compound the problem by at least 5 more times. Just the uranium alone would cause 8.5 Fukushimas, that nuclear power station that got flooded by a tsunami. 8.5 times the amount of radiation that emitted every second for every square mile for 6,000 years. And if you want to condense the accelerated nuclear decay into the flood year, that is 6,000 times worse. I don't know what 6,000 times 8.5 off the top of my head is, but that's every second for every square mile is basically what's the Russian one? Chernobyl. Chernobyl times, multiples. So the other thing, that's just with one decay species. The problem is compounded at least 5 times. So there's the radiation problem with that, and the heat problem. All that decay causes heat, it releases heat. That's why nuclear power plants need cooling units. That's how you get a nuclear meltdown. So literally, Chernobyl and Fukushima, the core melted through solid metal and concrete. You can go look at the pictures. It's quite amazing how hot this is. And again, that's 8.5 of them for every second, every square mile. And that's if over 6,000 years, which we've been recording for at least 2,000 plus years, and no sign of that. So the problem is compounded a lot. So that's one decay series, and that's just radiation. Andrew Snelling calculated, he's a creationist doctor of geology, that there would be 22,000 degrees in a similar radius, which would, just from, this isn't even radiation, this is adding on top. This is radiation. He calculated that it would boil off the oceans more than 3 times over. And then we have this radiation heat plus the subduction of continents, the moving of continents and rock at such fast rates during the flood model for the young Earth that would cause, and this was also calculated by creationist Dr. Baumgartner, 10 to the 26 joules of heat. And that would boil off the oceans more than 22 times over. And that's assuming a 300 increase of total Earth water. Because I know creationists say that there's at least 3 times more water under the Earth, so I just added that, and it's still, the ocean will be gone 22 times over. So that's basically it. Would have several orders of magnitude the temperature of the surface of the sun on Earth, that we would not have water, we would not have a solid crust. There's no way you can solve this unless you have magic. That's why the Rate Project said there's no way to solve this without exotic solutions, and they assume that there will be in the future, which I would categorize as unscientific. Let's see, just wrapping up. another cross confirmation method is that asteroids have the same long-term ages as we measure on the Earth, yet we're not subjected to the proposed natural causes of accelerated nuclear decay. So yeah, locally changing the fundamental forces of nature for each element and for each stratum, that is magic. That is an exotic solution. There's no naturalistic explanation for this. There isn't a clockwork solution that, where some disaster can sweep away the heat, because all the air, all the water, all of the rock is going to be vaporized. So there's no way to hack the laws of physics at different locations and still call this natural. And as I usually point out, I'll correct this later if I'm wrong, but I think it's ICR. They openly state that no matter what the science says, that their faith always comes first. So it's no wonder that no matter what the science is telling us that this is impossible, it doesn't really make a dent in these institutions. I find this fundamentally anti-science. And let's see, I guess let's just not forget that there's actually no reason for God to have made the accelerated nuclear decay. This is an ad hoc rescue device to explain the apparent radiometric age of the Earth, which actually gives us the single greatest blunder in all of creationist apologetics. And yeah, I think I'll be beating a dead horse if I keep going on. So there we go.
Perfect timing, because your timer just went off, so I appreciate that. Snake, that was your 15-minute opening statement. Before we hand it over to T-Rock, we've already got questions coming in the audience, so I appreciate it. We should be having a solid audience Q&A. Just make sure you are tagging me at either SFT or Standing for Truth, and that way I won't miss your question. So, T-Rock, we're going to hand it over to you. You now have 15 minutes for your opening statement, and I'll start whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Donnie. I'm gonna share my screen, if you will.
I can guide you through that. The fourth button, at least for my screen, says share. Once you click the share screen, another kind of separate box will pop up. Click share screen. You'll have a choice: entire screen, window, or Chrome. Under the entire screen, you'll see like a mini screen of your computer screen, and just make sure you click it. Once you click it, the share button at the bottom will highlight blue, and then you click that and you're good to go. Yeah, I see you. Looks good. Oops. I think looks like it's going to be me versus you now. Snake was right. So the much anticipated round 20 between Snake was right and SFT. You're muted, Snake.
Whoops. See, I told you, I thought I was going to go short on that opening, and it was 15 minutes exactly.
15 minutes right on, I know. Opening statements, rebuttals, they fly by. T-Rock should be back. I'm guessing he just accidentally clicked the leave studio, which is pretty well right next to the share button. So we will wait for T-Rock to come in. And while we do, I'll remind everybody we've had a week full of debates. Last night we had Jackson Rowe and Jonathan Guzman debate the important and interesting question: did modern birds come from theropod-like dinosaurs? That was an epic debate, very intellectual debate. Both Jackson and Guzman did a fantastic job. Then a couple days ago, we had a soteriology debate, got a little heated, but looks like everybody had fun. It's getting some good feedback. I debated Daniel Mira. Can a believer lose his salvation? So definitely check that out. And in a couple days, we're going to be having Luca Medugno here debating the film free, the feasibility of Noah's Ark. Now, I have been in the works putting together some big debates So just to let everybody know, get them kind of excited. In March, we got some great theology debates, including a really big debate on sola fide between a couple seasoned debaters. I'll announce that once I get the exact thesis kind of nailed down, and I'll add it to the event section and the upcoming live stream section of the channel. So make sure you're checking the website, standingfortruthministries.com, as well as the main channel, the upcoming live stream section, which I am updating pretty well as quickly as I can when I get debates scheduled and good to go. So let's see if T-Rock, in case he needs another link, let me just send it to him through, there we go, through email, just in case. So as you guys can probably see, we've got a couple days off, New Year's Eve, tomorrow and New Year's Eve, but the first week of January is going to be just packed, nearly a show every single day. And then my wife's due January 9th, but it could be a little bit before, a little bit after. And so I've kind of got a window there where there's about 10 days, nothing scheduled. But if we do shows, which we will, it'll just be kind of spur of the moment shows. Then right after that kind of 10-day window, starting on the 21st, we've got nonstop shows again. So this specific formal debate has been scheduled for quite a while. Maybe his internet cut out. So Jackson Rose says you take over for him. Maybe this was a round one knockout, Snake. I mean, first time for everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know my computer's having a heat problem, so maybe that happened too.
Heat problem all around.
Yeah.
So okay, guys. Well, we'll give them another 5 minutes. And
I'm cool with waiting for kind of all night. I'll
Yeah. No.
So, no rush there.
Okay. All right. Good.
Whatever if the audience all leaves, then
Yeah. So stick with us. Yeah. Iron Matt says the moderator will turn into the debater. No, guys, I'm not in debate mode tonight. I've already had my debate this week, so rest of the week off from debating. Godzilla Freak says, I wasn't expecting such a fast debate. Yeah, quickest debate in history. But I do believe he'll be back because he's been excited for this. All right, we are live for audience Q&A with Snake Was Right. So it's going to be audience taking on Snake Was Right. So it's about 46 on 1, Snake. The fun begins. You know what? You've had several debates on this topic now, so it's time to enter the big leagues. So if you want to take some audience questions until T-Rock comes back, even if T-Rock could just say something in the live chat or even through email to kind of let us know what's going on, unless he was raptured, which means the debate for January 7th looks like the pre-tribulation rapture takes it because T-Rock's been raptured, or maybe he's fallen into a black hole. I'm not sure. So why don't we get through some of these questions here. So here's a question that came in for you. Snake, coming at you. George Bond, or should I say James Bond? Let me see here. I'll put it up on screen for you. Let's see. Question for Snake Was Right from George Bond. Why do we find recumbent folds on the Coconino sandstone if this was the result of Aeolian deposits over millions of years?
I'm not sure what the contradiction there is. I can't give like a totally confident answer. I'm not a geologist, but if I had to guess, it's probably the same process by which any rock stratum gets warped and folded. Probably deposited, lithified, and underwent heat and pressure. So I'm not sure why coconina would be any different from any other layer or sandstone. I do know that the deposition of fine-grained, non-flocculated sandstone also deposits way shorter than, way slower than the young Earth creationist timescale allows for. Yeah.
Okay, well,
That's
I
all I got
appreciate.
for that.
There you go. There you go. Steadfast and Easy gives a super chat. I know I'm late for class, but I got a note from my mother. You're lucky. You're lucky. I'm gonna have to look that over, make sure that it's not really a note from you, Steadfast and Easy. But as of now, no detention. So let me. There we go. I appreciate the support. Oh, okay. So here's a question that comes in from Greeny. I want to ask Snake, why do stormtroopers use iPhones? Because they couldn't find the droids they were looking for.
Well, you know what? Let's see. Let's debunk that now. Samsung. Not an iPhone.
Oh, I think
See,
we're in luck.
Ken's onto something. Props come in handy.
No joke, Steak. I was this close to start going at it with you on the heat problem. This close, but then T-Rock has made his way back. T-Rock, we thought you might have been raptured. We thought we might have you may have fallen into a black hole, but you're here. So we appreciate it. Everything all good, brother? Oh, you're on mute, T-Rock.
Did you guys hear my presentation?
No.
Oh, man, you were doing a presentation that whole time. We lost you about 15, 20 minutes ago.
Oh, no. I'm so sorry. I hit the share screen thing and went straight into my deal and went into presenter mode on PowerPoint. And I was under the impression the whole time I was on full audio.
No, we were sitting here waiting for you. I sent you about a dozen emails and dozen messages in the live chat. So we've been, but that's fine. That's fine. It happens to the best of us. We're just glad that you're okay and you didn't, actually fall into a black hole. Lucas says that's epic. That is kind of epic, actually. T-Rock. It's the first time that's ever happened.
It's bizarre. I mean, let me try the share screen one more time just so you can see if you can at least connect to my PowerPoint. I'm going to go through exactly what I did before.
Yeah, what did you press to get out? Did you accidentally press leave studio?
No, I just literally went over to my deal and so see how it looks right now. I'm in standard PowerPoint mode. I just hit F5 to go into presenter mode.
Yeah, you're good. I mean, you're still here. You're still here.
That's literally all I did.
All right. Well, if it looks good now, so if you want, I guess you're gonna have. I guess you did a practice round there, and then now you can do the real round here. And yeah. So.
Well, I apologize. I'm not going to. That doesn't give Taylor much to argue against since he didn't get to see my stuff here.
Okay, Taylor, it's your 10-minute rebuttal now. I know you didn't hear much, but I guess you could always guess what T-Rock might have said. So, okay, yeah, hey, that's fine. I'm just glad that everything's good, T-Rock, because we're really looking forward to this debate. So, and it left people in suspense. So we got a good audience. T-Rock, do you want to go through it now? Everything looks good. And
I'll try and do a condensed version. So
no. That's okay. Take your first, because here's the thing. I can easily afterwards. I can go in the YouTube studio and trim out this last 15 minutes anyway. So then it'll just go right into your. So yeah, take the full 15 minutes. We don't need condensed or anything like that.
Okay. Here goes. Okay, so the biblical age is determined to be about 6,000 years plus or minus 200. The first 2,000 years from Adam to Abraham is based mostly on the ages of the patriarchs. and the second 2,000 years from Abraham to Christ is based mostly on kings' reigns, landmark historic events, etc., and about 2,000 years from Christ until now. So, are you guys still hearing me?
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
Could you imagine that happened again?
That's one of the bad things about presenter mode is it literally takes up both screens, and so I can't see you guys on the other side, and that's why I was oblivious to not being
Right.
in the
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah, that is kind of an issue.
Okay, so anyway, the reason the historical account in the Bible should be taken seriously is because these were not uneducated people. For thousands of years, people have been able to build very complex megalithic structures, far beyond what most people can even fathom to try and do today, including engineers and structural scientists, stuff like that, structural engineers. They just almost nobody has a clue on how to build like the Great Pyramid, for example. They've written very complex languages and pictographs, very accurately charted star movements. They've very accurately calculated solar events such as sidereal period of Venus. They've practiced advanced medicine, practiced advanced animal husbandry, used advanced mathematics, Babylonian trig, for example. So with that, on to radiometric dating, 4.55 billion years is determined from moon rocks. This assumes a zero or near zero daughter isotope in a uranium-lead system. It assumes meteor's origin was from a nearby supernova. But the problem with radiometric dating in general is that all radiometric dating, including recent carbon dating, must pass a geological context check. It does not work on samples of known age, and it is indistinguishable from contaminated samples in the absence of an external check, i.e. the geological context, which I'm referring. So backing up a slide, moon rocks, that is the geological context. The idea is that they've been out there in space, not affected by weathering on the Earth, that kind of thing, and so they should be more representative of a primordial material for creating the Earth, and so forth. So there is absolutely a geological context behind choosing these particular rocks to get a date from. So with that, here's the problem. So it's kind of ironic, I think, that creationists actually attribute most daughter products to 100% origin from radioactive decay, as opposed to being primordial, made at the same time that the parent was made. I find that hugely ironic. When I first heard people talking like that, I was like, why do you believe that? But then I got to thinking about it, and it actually makes more sense in a creationist context that would be true than in a naturalistic origins context. Why is that? It's because of this picture here is just basically meant to convey the idea of a supernova exploding. There's no control over this process. Supposedly heavier elements above iron are formed from supernova exploding. But there's this pressure gradient. I said pressure, temperature, ionization, however you want to quantify it, a gradient of processes during this explosion. And so part of the problem is that the daughter isotopes are lower density than the parent, which means that you would think in an exploding supernova, you would probably have more of that than you would the higher energy requirements for the heavier parent isotope. So it actually doesn't make any sense. So why weren't there? Why do modern mainstream scientists just assume that there was no daughter isotope formed when this supernova exploded? That just doesn't make any good sense. I don't know that I've ever read an explanation for that anywhere, or some kind of justification for it, because I don't honestly believe they'd do anything more than just probably some storytelling. But then also, why is all the solar debris moving so slowly? A supernova implies escape velocity from 1/3 c to 2/3 c. In other words, about 60 to 120,000 miles per second. And the Earth is only moving at about 18 miles per second. 67,000 miles per hour sounds fast, but it's incredibly slow compared to what you would get from a supernova explosion. And so again, why is all the debris in our solar system moving so slow, particularly if the debris came from some nearby supernova? Somebody might argue that, well, gravitational influence of other interstellar bodies can impact the velocity. Okay. But problem is, those speeds are so fast that mostly what you're going to get is deflections. You're going to change the curvature of the trajectory more than anything, and not actually slow them down that much. And the closer they are to our solar system, the fewer opportunities they have to be influenced by gravity. So again, I think this is a huge conundrum for the naturalistic explanation. Why did you pick those rocks? Well, there's a little more idealism than realism, I think. Okay, so signs of great youth in lunar recession. The moon is leaving the Earth. Everybody's heard this. Crashes at about 1.2 billion years in the past. It's actually inversely related to the sixth power of the radius, meaning the distance between the Earth and the moon, which basically gives it an exponentially fast dive into the Earth, as some of the apologists you've probably seen demonstrate. The gravity is inversely proportional to r squared, but because of these two things here, the tidal frequency and magnitude increase dramatically, and erosion is greatly accelerated. And I think overall this limits the age of the Earth to under 100 million years. And this next slide will show you why. This little table here shows you that the current distance from the Earth is about 240,000, with about a 30-day revolution cycle around the Earth, and a relative gravity, I just call it 1.0 as a reference frame. Calculating backwards to go back to 220,000, you find out that the revolution becomes 27.5 days, which means you actually get 13 lunar cycles in a year instead of 12. And you go back another 20,000, and now you've got 14 lunar cycles instead of 12. And it doesn't actually take very many millions of years back in time to achieve these numbers. So Roche limit aside, all that stuff's completely irrelevant, because you run into huge problems long before you get that close. This relative gravity shows you that ranging from about 9 up to 1.1 in the range that I've calculated for, but a 10% increase in gravitational attraction to the Earth is a huge problem. It just shows you that everything should have eroded much faster in the past. Even today's, I'll say, slow erosion rates are way too fast for hundreds of millions of years. But draw the moon in a little bit closer and it just exponentially gets worse. Okay, human and animal population. Lower human population doubling time limit is under 20 years. Current human population doubling time is about 40 years. Average human population doubling time since the flood is about 149 years, roughly 2 human lifespans. Average human population doubling time for evolution is about 100,000 years. That's kind of ridiculous. That's about 30,000 lifespans by evolutionary reckoning, where lifespans were much shorter in the past. I say 30,000, 3,000, I guess. Most animals can reproduce much faster than people, if for no other reason, because they have larger litter sizes. Rabbits, for example, can reproduce at a minimum annually and have supposedly been here for tens of millions of years, if not more. They supposedly predate the extinction of the dinosaurs. This gives rabbits an evolutionary average doubling time of about 4 million years, which makes no sense at all. The creationist average doubling time would have it at around 150 years. So if humans had maintained an average doubling time of 40 years per latest government statistics, since the flood just 4,400 years ago, there would be about 7.8 million billion people on Earth today, or 7.8 times 10 to the 33rd, I believe. If rabbits had maintained an average doubling time of 1 million years since the alleged dinosaur extinction, there would be about 3.7 times 10 to the 23rd rabbits on Earth today. None of the population metrics make any sense in the light of an ancient Earth. Okay, so Wind Cave is particularly interesting to me because I had the pleasure of interacting with a PhD biologist not a geologist. Nevertheless, he was a staunch defender of evolution and an old Earth, and he posed this as a challenge for young Earth creationists. So I decided to look at it and see if there really was anything to his challenge. So basic stats come from this nps.gov website. Allegedly 350 million years old, first cave passage at about 320 million years ago, continued marine deposition and erosion for about 240 million years, tectonic uplift at about 40 to 60 million years ago, tectonic uplift further opened cavities within the limestone. Now that I'm fixing to show you why that does not make sense. That's in quotes because that is exactly what they said on that website. The passageways, here are the problems. The passageways are too parallel to the sedimentation deposit. You can look in this view right here, and they just run really nice and neat and parallel to the sedimentation. So given the overall age, you might kind of think that makes sense, but it really doesn't. There are no, and this is why there are no significant pooling cavities following the uplift. So this 40 to 60 million year timeline implies about 11 to 17% of the overall cave history was in some sort of uplifting state, which means if it really was the product of very slow, gradual acidic etching to create the cavities in there, you should have some pooling in here that kind of drops down to the bottom down here, and they're just not there. Everything looks like it came straight down vertical and ran straight horizontal, with the exception, which I think is really interesting, the way the mouth of the cave opens out to the outside. What's wrong with that? There's something wrong in the context of how they think this cave formed, and that is that it actually, there's no particular reason for it, the opening, to suddenly take an upturn and come out the side. That doesn't really make any sense. What it looks to me like is probably more the product of some gassing pressure inside there, just kind of blew out the top, sort of like how you'd squeeze a tube of toothpaste or something. So that feature alone makes it look like this whole thing is not actually 100% product of acidic erosion anyway. Triassic, Jurassic, etc., are completely missing from this particular formation. That's sandstone above there. I don't know exactly what the age of that sandstone is supposed to be, but nonetheless, the ages that are typically associated with dinosaurs and their precursors are just not in there. So anyway, geologic column. Where does the entire column exist? Well, a handful of places arguably have representative strata for the entire column, meaning mainly from the Cambrian on up to the Holocene, not necessarily so much the Proterozoic, Archean, and the Hadean. But anyway, the problem is they're missing the vast majority of the time. Beyond that, most locations are very random in what they contain and even what appears at ground level. See Wind Cave, for example, above, it looks like two ages captured out of all of this stuff. And many sites have Jurassic, Cretaceous, etc., right at the ground level with nothing on top of them. This example here is given from the Creation website, but this is a sample from North Dakota where the complete column is supposed to represent about 100 miles, but the actual place where supposedly the whole column exists in North Dakota has like 3% of that. So it's like almost all of the time, alleged time, is missing completely. Meanwhile, unconformities and nonconformities, etc., are the norm, with sharp and distinct boundaries between each layer. Erosional remnants are almost completely missing, along with bioperturbation and
1 minute.
souls. Got it. And so there's almost nothing. There's almost nothing in those layers that suggest any time passed between the formation of any given layer. You want to talk about erosion? There really isn't any. I've heard mention about raindrops in there. Okay. Raindrops have to be captured really quickly, otherwise they disappear in a day or two. And that's not the type of erosion you would expect if vast periods of time have gone by between what you should see is very deep cutting erosion of some sort. And it's not there. And so this nice pretty picture of the Grand Canyon kind of reiterates what you see in the schematic there. So I'm going to go ahead and stop right there and kind of see if we can let this conversation continue.
I appreciate that opening statement and the visuals, T-Rock. Also, thank you for your patience and endurance. T-Rock, I know you pretty well just did 30 minutes of opening presentation, so you're probably winded a little bit, which means we'll give you a 10-minute break right now. So, Snake can do his rebuttal. So again, thanks for your patience there. And that concludes the opening statement. So those were 15-minute opening statements. T-Rock, Snake, I appreciate it. Again, to the audience, I see a bunch of questions coming in. I'm a little bit behind during Snake's rebuttal. I will go and grab them all and save them for the audience Q&A. So Snake, whenever you're ready, you are on mute. So just make sure you unmute yourself. You've got 10 minutes for your rebuttal.
Thanks for the reminder. I probably would not have remembered. Okay, so I took some notes during this, so I have hopefully a pretty comprehensive list. So the age of the Earth basically is based on the Bible. I won't go into that too much, but it's not reliable. It's just basically you wouldn't rely on any other religious text for that, and it's never stated explicitly. And I should look this up, but because I forgot what it is, but I think there's some controversy about the original person who, early 1900s calculated the 6,000 years rule. People have gone back over it. It's not exactly 6,000 years. I think there was a little bit of fudging or just not accounting for everything going on, but I wish I had more. I wish I could tell you the name of those people, but that's all I remember for now. So the point about the ancient peoples were not stupid, that's definitely not what I'm trying to insinuate. If that was ever thought that that's what I was doing, ancient peoples were very advanced, more advanced than I think we give them credit for most of the time. I agree, but they did not know nuclear physics, certainly, and they did not have a rigorous scientific method. So most of this, that's why science has advanced. Most of this stuff, the natural sciences were not much of a thing. They medical science, they did know some about anatomy and kind of medicine through trial and error, but the four humors, for example, was a postulate in medicine for a long time, into I think even the Renaissance. So they did not have as advanced a scientific method as we do today, even though they had a long history of trial and error, things that would work. They had very creative minds, very ingenuitive, lots of ingenuity. So yeah, I don't think that they would have known about the heat problem, because that is based on modern scientific discoveries of the atom and the fundamental forces within. And so the radiometric dating, so the problem with dating for like current known ages, like dating a volcano that just erupted, is that's within the margin of error. So you're going to get trace elements and contaminants that either haven't boiled out yet, or the trace elements, which should be negligible at the low level of the contaminant, the parent and the daughter, creates an unrealistic ratio, which looks like a long-term ratio because nothing has actually decayed yet. So we know that this is a problem, and that's why it's within the margin of error. But radiometric dating has been shown to work with known ages. They've dated things from the Middle Ages with known dates that were recorded contemporaneously, and the carbon dating usually is what we use for those kinds of things, unlike dating rocks, but it's the same principle. And they've been accurate. But again, carbon dating still can't be used for something that died 5 minutes ago because it needs time to decay and get that ratio a little bit more separated. So then there's the claim about the absence of an external check for the mainstream geological dates, and I would say that there's at least, well, for carbon dating, there's obviously the recorded dates, which are much more reliable than myths and legends from much longer ago, because we also cross-confirm historical documents. Also, there's cross-confirmation for the individual decay species, so it doesn't actually matter what concerns you have about how it works. You literally have to understand nothing about this, and as long as the different decay species are cross-confirming each other, that is complete confirmation right there. So the other thing is, so I know you guys accept the Bible as an external check, but I do not. So I don't think that there is any external check for the creationist claims for the age. There's no test we can actually do. Just, a book of myths that is kind of extrapolated. It doesn't actually explicitly say. So, and then there's the question, why wouldn't daughter products be formed simultaneously with the parents? So we've only ever observed these isotopes as product of decay. And so these daughter elements exist simultaneously with the parents. But an isotope, for anyone who doesn't know, is specifically a variant of an element, and usually kind of an unstable version, because this basically means variation in neutron. So the proton defines, the proton number defines the element, and decay can cause loss of proton, electron, or neutron. So usually isotopes are going to be losing neutrons. That changes the weight of the element. Loss of electrons can also affect this. Loss of protons will cause the element to become a different element. So the specific atomic number, which is neutron and proton together, for some elements, the isotope is, the neutrons are different from typical elemental stable versions, and we know that specific isotopes, specific atomic numbers for certain elements have only ever been observed to have come from an element that is decaying. Like if something has, I'm just picking a random number, 10 protons, 10 neutrons, and it loses a proton, well, then we know that this is an element that's come from a decay product. So lunar recession. I'm not sure why increased gravitational attraction is a problem, but let me go through some numbers here. As for the recession, so 14 billion years ago times 4 centimeters of recession is 180,000 kilometers. Current average distance of the moon, 385,000 kilometers. The Roche limit is 18,000 to 9.5 thousand kilometers, under which the moon would collapse into the Earth. So 385,000 minus 180,000 is 205,000. 205,000 is greater than 18,400, so the moon is not going to crash into the Earth. And again, I'm not sure, maybe we can talk about the increased gravitational attraction, why that's a problem, stronger tides, I don't know. So the reproduction rates, first of all, populations don't double like that in nature. Like the reason human populations expand a lot like that is because we're also expanding our food supply. So populations tend to stop when resources go thin. You just start dying off. It's a self-containing problem. Predator populations explode.
1 minute.
I forget the ecological there's a word for this ecological system that keeps things in check. The amount of plants keeps the herbivores in check, and the amount of predators keeps the herbivores in check as well. And if herbivores get too much, they eat too much plants, and it's this whole domino effect. Plus, so that's not going to be a problem. What is going to be a problem population-wise is the evolution rate coming off the arc is going to be way too fast for realistic limits. That's going to be one species per kind per year, going off of Answers in Genesis kinds. And your question about let's see, well, the wind cave, I agree. Erosion, gas pressure, I mean, that seems like you explained it. And sometimes erosion is more significant than deposition, so it makes sense. We wouldn't always expect every geological strata to exist everywhere. And the sharp contrast in layers is due to different geological conditions. Things turn to deserts and rainforests and back again, and different deposition all around the world. And I'm glad to see that you at least accept some geological column. So.
All right. Well, that concludes Snake's 10-minute rebuttal. Thank you for that rebuttal there. Snake was right. We're going to pass it on to T-Rock. T-Rock, you now have 10 minutes for your rebuttal. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of rebut the rebuttal here. I'll just be honest with you. I'm not to be rude at all, but that's some pretty bad logic for most of that. No nuclear physics. Okay, you don't need nuclear physics to know whether you built a boat. You don't need nuclear physics to know whether, how old you were when your eldest son was born. You don't need nuclear physics to know, events that happen. Didn't need to know about a heat problem. The heat problem is actually, by and large, more of a talking point than it is an actual problem. I'll get into that more later during the open discussion, probably. Definitely not something I shy away from. But the heat problem is not what people think it is at all. Margin of error for rocks of known age. This is a pretty common thing for long agers to suggest. And basically, there's a problem with that, because if you go and like the Mount St. Helens example, you go and you try and get a radiometric date off of it, it'll be a potassium argon issue probably, and you'll get this number like 300,000 years plus or minus 300,000 years, and that's supposedly within the margin of error. Okay, let me explain why that's complete baloney. Because now, if you said 300,000 years plus 300,000 minus 0 or minus some very small number, it would make sense. But then if you did that, you would be admitting that it didn't work anyway. Why doesn't the minus 300,000 work in a margin of error? Because you're essentially saying you measured isotopes that didn't even exist. And if you're able to measure isotopes that don't exist, how do you know any measurements you ever take are correct? So yeah, a minus plus minus equal margin of error for rocks of known age, it just makes no practical sense at all. Known dates from the Middle Ages. What were you saying about that? Known dates from Middle Ages. Again, I think the context there was carbon-14 dating. Again, every radiometric method requires some sort of geological or archaeological context to verify. Nobody just sits down and writes a formula and says, poof, now I know the age, without comparing it to something to see if they think their calculation was correct. So when you date something from the Middle Ages and you get it correct, you only know it's correct because you had something to compare it to verify that. Cross-confirmed decay species. I'll be honest with you, this seems a little too hand wavy and kind of a hasty generalization. Cross-confirmed decay species. The reason I've never bought into this idea is because instructor after instructor after instructor at the university level will tell you that when it comes to radiometric dating methods, there is a preferred method for a given time range. So the younger stuff would be typically potassium argon. The older stuff above that might be something like rubidium strontium. You want a little older than that. There's another range where you would apply a different method, like samarium, neodymium. On a different range, you might go to some type of plutonium or uranium lead system. Anyway, point is they segregate them out into these different ranges where they think they work the best. And so there's not this neat little confirmed decay rate across where you can just pick up one sample and say, oh, I'll use 5 different methods and get the same exact age off of 5 different methods, because they all have prescribed ranges that they believe that they work in. Okay, only observe daughters as product of decay. That is really circular reasoning. Nobody's ever captured a piece of debris that is known to have flown off of a supernova. It's just assumed that that's where it came from. And so what do you have to actually compare your current day observation against? You got nothing. There's literally nothing to compare it to. So to say, oh, well, we've only ever seen it this way. Well, of course you have, because there's no other way to verify it against a true known geological context, which would be to capture a piece of flying debris off of a supernova. That's probably not going to happen. Isotopes are unstable version of another element. Not sure exactly what the point there was, but daughter isotopes are specifically used as the stop clock deal because they are stable. Linear calculations for lunar recession, that was just a big blunder, because it's not, I showed in my slide, it's related to the 6th power of the distance between the sun and or between the earth and the moon. It's not a linear calculation at all. It's an exponential calculation. That's why it looks like an exponential decay curve. It just literally accelerates and slams into the earth at a rather fast rate down towards the last couple 100 million years. And again, what I was pointing out was, because it's not a linear calculation, it really does magnify the problem of erosional rates on Earth, largely because of tides. But the moon also lifts solid ground. It doesn't just move water, it moves ground as well. Food sources go thin, population growth slows down. Okay, what's the problem with this? So if you look at the secular view of history, pretty much everybody agrees that even places like the Middle East, the Arctic, the Antarctic, they were all very lush places of the past, very lush. Why do you have cave lions in the Arctic? That doesn't make any sense. But nonetheless, you find distinct patterns of somewhat of a tropic, subtropic looking environment, very, very lush environments all over the world. So to say that the food sources go thin, that doesn't really make any sense. Also, by the way, the vast majority of well, let me say it this way: the significant carnivores seriously are outnumbered by the herbivores. So there's not enough serious carnivores out there to do a very good job at controlling the population growth rate of herbivores. Evolution is too fast for YC timeline. This, I could go into a rather lengthy deal on this. I guess since I've got a couple more minutes left, I'll kind of go into this a little bit, because I think it's extremely interesting about the evolutionary view of evolution, of biological evolution. And that is that biological evolution basically assumes that mutations plus natural selection plus, gene drift and whatever, differential reproduction, however they want to say it, are all the contributing factors to biological evolution. Here's the problem. It's probably going to come as a shock to a lot of people, but you don't even need natural selection for speciation to occur. In other words, the typical view of natural selection is that something got a little better suited to its environment. It lived. Whoever did not get those mutations basically died and had to go away. But you don't even need that for actual biological speciation. And the reason is because if you start out with 2 rabbits coming off the ark, the first rabbit, the first pair of rabbits, going to have a litter of probably 4 to 6 to 8 baby rabbits. And then if you just assume for the sake of argument, half male, half female. You can pair them up. Each pair can go its own direction and do its own thing, and it can live in kind of what I think of as sort of a boundary zone between climate conditions, and just kind of hang out there and literally make adaptations in real time without any of the population having to die or be considered less fit. They just live where they can live and survive where they're comfortable surviving. And they just keep multiplying, and as their generations start adapting an inbuilt creationist idea of front-loaded variability, they just go into the environments that they're comfortable in. And so, for example, you think of like color changing animals. So it's obviously well known that Arctic climate animals have very white fur, like Arctic foxes, polar bears, different things like that, the wolves, whatever, because that's what that environment does to the fur color of the animal. Interesting. And then you think of other animals like a chameleon that changes its color literally on the fly, and there's a few other animals that probably do it. Interestingly, I took a bass one time and threw him in a tank, caught him out of a pond, and threw him in a clear water aquarium. And within seconds, literally within seconds, his color completely changed to match the new tank. And so the point is that those types of adaptations are built in, and they can happen in real time. So when you got populations spreading out, the first litter of bunnies is 6 bunnies, say, and then you got
10 seconds.
Three subpopulations, and then the process just continues on, and you can get population growth rate and speciation very, very quickly like that.
All right, I appreciate that 10-minute rebuttal, T-Rock. That concludes the opening statements, the 15-minute opening statements, and the rebuttal round of 10 minutes. Great debate so far. You guys have obviously put some work into this, so I appreciate it. Lots of points to discuss and lots of topics for you guys to kind of address and have a discussion on. So that being said, we are moving into the 40-minute discussion portion. And what we can do is allow Snake Was Right to kind of kick us off in this discussion, since T-Rock just ended with his rebuttal. Snake, maybe you had a few points you wanted to address, followed up by a question. But gentlemen, I will moderate as needed, but we'll try and keep this kind of free-flowing and organic. So go ahead, floor is yours. And Snake, you can start us off.
All right. Well, I don't know if I want to make any points specifically because there's a lot there. Maybe we can get to all of it. I didn't see any really good responses, but I guess we'll go with so there was no response really at all to the heat problem. So why do you think that that's so trivial?
Well, just make sure you unmute, T-Rock.
Thank you.
You're good.
I deliberately left that one alone because it's a little deeper conversation. I didn't want to have to buzz through it super fast. The reason is because when you look at the energy equation, it is literally, it's the well-known E equals MC squared, right? And it is literally an energy equation, not a heat equation. That's kind of important. I do realize that a lot of the professional apologists kind of talk about it as a heat problem per se, and that's okay. But it is an energy equation, not a heat, not a heat specific equation. Now, the idea of heat, of course, comes from the fact that the particles fly out of the parent isotope and then instantly collide with something very nearby and then create, thermal issues right away. So why is it not so much a problem? Well, one of the big assumptions I think people just kind of hand wave right past is there's two pieces to this. One is that some of this apparent nuclear rapid nuclear decay is associated directly with creation week, not the flood, and some of it's associated with the flood. By a lot of the mainstream creation, or a lot of the higher big name creation geologists. Some of it is associated with the flood, which is fine. But here's the deal. So for creation week, you can't say hardly anything about that because, and to be clear, let me be real clear here. And I apologize. I don't want to take too much of the time here. It's just that this is kind of a complicated subject. But to be real clear, I do not invoke miracles where the Bible does not specifically give me cause to. So I'm not going to say, oh, God must have done this, that, or the other, if there's nothing in the Bible that tells it. God tells us where he intervened. And so that's where I would insert miracles, where God literally said, hey, I did this. And so the flood, literally, he says, even I do bring a flood upon the earth. So he's saying, this is not random chance. This is not some weird astronomical problem, some big planet swooped by and distorted the gravity of the earth or whatever and caused a flood. It's none of it is random at all. God literally did it himself. The Bible tells us that. So having said that, how much of this accelerated decay happened in what period of time? That's kind of the point. Did it happen over one day instantaneously? Did it happen over 150 days, over 371 days of the flood? Over what period of time did it happen? So I'm going to suggest that it probably did not happen in 1 or 2 days. It probably happened in a bunch of days, if there was such an acceleration during the flood. And so what I suppose happens is in the granites where you find this accelerated decay, what you get is, yes, you start out with heat, but you're also fusing water through the granites at a very fast rate. And so what are you doing? You're converting heat energy into mechanical energy. So you're converting it to mechanical energy, which can also convert it into electromagnetic energy and a whole, whatever the spectrum of different types of energy there are, you can convert it through all these different formats, not the least of which is the heat itself, in terms of whatever actual heat does come out of it. The core of the earth is much, much, much greater volume than the crust of the earth. And so it would literally act as a heat sink. So yeah, between the core of the earth acting as a heat sink and converting energy across a number of different forms, including kinetic energy is one of the big ones, I think, because it does account for rapid movement of the continents. So yeah, that's essentially why, because I think people are just generalizing what a heat problem is too much and not breaking it down to its actual energy components.
Okay, so a few problems there. So you said energy, not heat. So the energy that's produced from nuclear reactions and nuclear decay and from friction of continents moving is heat energy. That's what it is. That's what it's been calculated by creationist doctors in their relevant fields. And you said heat is converting to kinetic energy, but again, that's completely backwards. The kinetic energy is happening first. The continents are moving, which is creating the heat. So it's not that there's just heat all of a sudden and then that moves the continents. But you are right in some sense that heat can create kinetic energy, in that this amount of heat will literally cause rock and water and gases to explode off of the planet at high speeds. So if you're going to condense the accelerated nuclear decay down to a year, that would be 51,000 nuclear meltdowns per square mile per second for a year. And so yeah, that's going to explode everything out into space, including Noah, including everything else. So, and the core of the Earth is not going to be able to sink that kind of heat either, because the heat's occurring at the surface at first, so it's going to vaporize all the water first, even if the heat's going to go into the core, which I don't think the core can take 25 times the surface of the sun. So
would you like a response to that? Okay, again, it's kind of a hand-wavy thing to just say, oh, all this heat just comes out and blows everything apart, because you're giving no context for how long did the accelerated decay take and exactly what was that rate. And one of the comments that you made was that that the kinetic energy came first. Well, that depends on whose model you're looking at. That's not a known historic fact. You don't know whether the continent started moving first, or whether the decay, the accelerated decay started first, or if they started simultaneously. There's just no way to know that. The best you can do is just take a sampling of the present day data and make a best guess at it.
So how's that hand waving? Because I gave you the exact rate for a year and for 6,000 years. The more
well, it's hand waving because, like I said, you're still not breaking it down to all of the base components of the energy. So, for example, it's a well-established fact that you got all these guyotes in the bottom of the ocean, and they're planed completely flat across the top. They're essentially just volcanoes that have been planed across the top of them, but they're so far underneath the current ocean level that something's not right. That didn't happen underwater to those. That happened while those were up high. So if during an accelerated decay event, and again, not really knowing exactly what the rate and exactly what the heat sink provides in the core and all that stuff, you can make reasonable assumptions that you got the same basic mechanics as what we would use in a nuclear reactor today. We convert the heat into usable energy, which is what I'm suggesting here. And so that what that means is, if you take the ocean floor and you accelerate the decay of the basal granites underneath it, or the basalts, and then you lift the entire ocean floor, how much kinetic energy is that? If you lift the entire ocean floor up to help flood the earth and then let it collapse back down, that is a huge, huge amount of kinetic energy. It's not insignificant.
Which would be converted directly into heat energy as soon as it slams back down or has any friction. And that's one of the calculations that
no, it's like any other.
had.
It's like any other falling process. How fast is it falling? What's it falling against? There's a bunch of factors that go into that. You can't just say.
Well, I'm going off the I'm going off the numbers from it was Baumgartner or Snelling, who are both creationist doctors. So doctorates. So it's, and the rate project, which is a creationist project, same thing. They admit that there's a massive heat problem. And the thing that you said about nuclear core converting heat energy into kinetic energy, well, they take a small fraction of that. It's basically a steam engine kind of thing, because it creates steam. But that's why nuclear power plants melt down, is because there's so much excess heat that the coolant systems fail, and it melts through solid steel and concrete and bedrock. If the coolant system isn't constantly taking all of the excess heat out, because if we're using all of that heat energy to convert into kinetic energy, the factory would just explode instantly.
Sure, but it's a difficult comparison to make like that, because in a nuclear reactor, you've essentially got a highly concentrated form of radioactive material, whereas in the Earth, it's not highly concentrated. It's very well distributed. So in a nuclear reactor, they're trying to channel a very heavily concentrated amount of energy into a very, very small surface area, so to speak, in the channels that they use to conduct heat away, whereas in the Earth, you don't have that problem.
But that's what it would look like if you had accelerated nuclear decay, is you would have high rates of nuclear decay, which is what a nuclear reaction produces, and that's why it produces heat. So that's why it's comparable. So it's only low heat because the normal decay rate is so low. But if you accelerate that by 750,000 times, it's going to produce a lot more heat.
Sure, but it's also going to move the entire planet, which is a huge amount of kinetic energy.
I agree, and all the water is going to boil off too.
How much heat energy does it take to lift, for example, 1 cubic mile of granite 1 mile in the air? How much heat energy is that? It's a huge amount. It is an absolutely devastating amount to move continents laterally, or the extreme case in point is of course Mount St. Everest. How did it get so tall? That's a lot of kinetic energy that absorbs, that basically absorbs some of the excess energy from any possible accelerated decay. And again, as I pointed out earlier, there's two different events that we're associating accelerated decay with. One is creation week, and the other one is the floods. So how much of which contributes to what? There's no way to know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhere between 8.5 nuclear meltdowns per second per square mile and 51,000 nuclear meltdowns per square mile per second.
And that's based on, is it based on the 1.5 billion years of accelerated decay?
That's based on how much decay would have happened. Well, we know that there was some decay that happened. So the response is, well, it was accelerated. It happened in 6,000 years or less, or it happened over billions of years. If it takes billions of years, there's no heat problem. If it takes 6,000 years, there's a huge heat problem. And even if the heat goes into the continent, energy does not disappear. If something goes up, it comes down. And like a comet, it's going to create a fiery explosion, and it's going to create friction. That energy never goes away, because if you use kinetic energy to move something up, that now it has potential energy. You haven't just wasted that energy like you paid for it and now the cash is gone. The energy's still in it, and it has to come down, and the energy will come out of it again somehow.
So what do you suppose the temperature of the core of the Earth was when the Earth was first formed?
I'm not sure.
Well, exactly. That's part of the point. Is that some of this decay is associated with creation. Of course, energy doesn't create itself, or matter and energy, neither one create itself out of nothing. You have to have something outside of matter and energy to create it. I mean, this isn't a Big Bang conversation per se, but you have to get the matter from somewhere. Where did it come from? How did the planet form? The secular explanation of what's the word they use for the basically debris just kind of coalescing to form the planet. Again,
Accretion.
Yeah, planetary accretion doesn't really make any sense given how fast debris flies off of a supernova. There's no common sense in that whatsoever. But again, you have no idea. Nobody knows what the core temperature of the Earth was at creation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the experts think they have a pretty good explanation, but I'm perfectly willing to concede for this conversation. Let's just say God created the Earth. So did God create it 6,000 years ago, or did he create it 4.5 billion years ago? And why have accelerated nuclear decay? There appears to be no reason whatsoever for it. The only effect it has is to make the Earth look older than it is.
Well, so that's a really good question. I mean, it's definitely one worth exploring. Let me back up just a second. You said, so if God created the Earth, did he do it in 6,000 years or in 4.5 billion years? Well, the answer is if there is a God powerful enough to create a planet out of nothing, he's smart enough to tell you how long it took. And that's what the Bible is. It's the one who's outside of space and time, powerful enough to do it, and smart enough to tell you how he did it. So beyond that, what was your other point about your other question about?
Well, why accelerate the decay? Why not just create the planet in a young-looking state? Because that just confuses scientists. God would have full knowledge, and it could be the Hindu God that they say that it was that the Earth was created billions of years ago. So
well, that's a great question. And so you made the comment earlier that you would never rely on other religious texts to kind of parse any of the history of the world out, and I would totally agree. But there is a huge difference between Christianity and other quote unquote religious texts, and that is that when an archaeologist goes out into the field to investigate the world, many of them carry a Bible in their hands specifically so they can read about details and know what to look for. And it is a very fruitful exercise to do so. You cannot say that about any other religious text. None of them have that comprehensive of a history. They might have, a few of them might have little spotty histories here and there, but none of them do what the Bible does in terms of a well-recorded history across a broad timeline. But why accelerated decay? So again, this goes back to processes that people honestly just don't understand. you assume that heavier elements above iron come from a supernova. It's literally just an assumption. You don't know. What we do know is that heavier elements are basically endothermic reactions, and they absorb a lot of energy. So why accelerated decay? It may have been necessary to, basically the Bible says that the earth was created in and out of water, and it may have been necessary to create some of the heavier elements we find on earth. And another one, as has been pointed out before on this channel, is that heat is actually it's not a bug, it's a feature of the flood mechanism. So again, parse it out. How much accelerated decay went into creation week and how much went into flood week or flood year?
Well, either way, even if you space it out 6,000 years, which we have 2,000 plus years of pretty good history, that doesn't include the oceans boiling off.
So I mean, you tell me, do you know how to create heavier elements?
Well, God could just put them there. He wouldn't need to go through. He wouldn't need to use like a chemist set
That's
to go through that. He could just put it there. Just say the word, and it's there.
That's a little more of a theological idea than it is a realistic idea, because theologically, God does use processes, and so the God of the Bible is a God that not only uses processes, he's also the creator of the laws of the universe. And so one major theological point is that God does not break his own laws.
Well, that's what accelerated nuclear decay is it's breaking the laws. It would you would have to be breaking the fundamental nuclear forces.
No, that's completely not true. You can accelerate nuclear decay in a lab. Are modern scientists breaking? Yes, you can. You can accelerate them by a billionfold.
No, you can have nuclear reactions.
No, you can actually accelerate radioactive decay.
No, that's not possible. It hasn't been done. There have been some studies that thought that they did it, and then they went back and reviewed the methods and tried and eliminated some variables, and they found out that it actually was not accelerated.
I will say this, that modern scientists are actually kind of in the dark about this whole topic anyway, because they have kind of waffled back and forth over the years on whether things like solar storms and things like that could potentially create slight increases and decreases. And when you start actually looking at decay rates, they're typically calibrated against an idealistic curve against a single isotope. Uranium, pick it, whatever one it is, but that's what they're doing, is they're calibrating decay rates against what they consider to be a known standard. So yeah, I don't think their knowledge on this subject is anywhere near robust. But I think a little review of the open literature, and to be sure, it'd probably take some digging, but it is fairly well known that you can accelerate nuclear decay.
Not in the mainstream sciences, and I looked up all the claimed instances of that, and there have been rebuttal studies that showed that it was some other variable that was, like for example, one of them, they were using a Geiger counter, and the ionizing radiation was causing the Geiger counter to, it was basically measuring the radiation from the environment and not from the actual sample. So they changed their methods and got completely different results. And there's that for every single attempt at overturning it. Or it's just a nuclear reaction, which a lot of people don't understand the difference between latent decay and a nuclear reaction, because they're kind of the same thing. It's just one is a domino effect. But it's just, if you're not colliding particles, that's the latent decay rate.
Actually, if I could jump in here, gentlemen, because that is the first 20 minutes of the discussion. And of course, T-Rock, if you wanted to respond to that in a second, because that was the first 20 minutes and Snake kind of led the way. We discussed radiometric dating, accelerated nuclear decay, the heat problem. Great discussion, very intelligent dialogue going on. Definitely loving it. Did we want to kind of change gears here and maybe have T-Rock lead the way and give a line of evidence that he believes is a line of evidence that supports the young Earth creation model and is a problem for Snake's position, the old Earth creation model. Go ahead, T-Rock. We'll let you lead the way now.
Okay, so I guess I'll go back to the lunar recession deal. I'm just curious because I see this so much. Why did you give a linear calculation for the recession of the moon?
Oh, that's because that's the best possible scenario for, I guess, your side. Worst possible scenario for me, that would get the moon as close as possible, because if the recession is speeding up exponentially in real time, it was slower back then. So in reality, yes, the linear model is totally unrealistic. So the moon would be a lot further than the linear model allows, and the linear model is nowhere near crashing into the Earth.
So I say that again, the linear model is a lot further than the linear model allows.
The linear model, if we rewind it, will get the moon closer to the Earth than the realistic exponential model.
No, that's the exact backwards.
No, because time moves forward. It's speeding up now. So if the recession of the moon was slower in the past, so it would have been further than the linear model.
No, that's exactly backwards. The actual physics behind it's the tidal bulge that kind of forces the moon to push out away from the Earth, and it does not slow down coming in. It speeds up drastically. The gravitational pull becomes much stronger, and the tidal bulge becomes much bigger. And it's the size of that tidal bulge and trying to maintain a conservation of angular momentum that pushes it out faster whenever it's closer and slower when it's further out, because the tidal bulge just gets smaller and smaller as it recedes away from the Earth.
That's why the recession is speeding up, because when it was closer to the Earth, it receded very slowly, and the further out it goes, the faster the recession. So that's time moving forward, it's speeding up. Time moving backward, it's slowing down. So
that's just
the linear model is going to get the moon closer than the realistic model. So the linear model would be worst case scenario. It still isn't a problem at all.
That's completely backwards physics, and like I've already shown, even 20,000 miles. I already explained it to you. That it's the size of the tidal bulge that's pushing it out, and the smaller that tidal bulge gets, the less it can push it out. So
that's
further
why
back
the recession
in time,
is speeding up.
Huh?
That's why the recession is speeding up, because the tidal bulge has less effect.
No, the recession is not speeding up. It's slowing down. It gets slower and slower and slower. That's the physics. That's the literal Newtonian physics in planetary bodies. That's why, essentially, because we're talking about a Earth-Moon system, and the moon is getting further and further away from the sun, but the whole system is spinning, right? Well, then we've also got our planets spinning around the sun, and presumably you've got a similar effect, and then you've got solar systems spinning around galaxies, and you've got a similar effect, and then you've got clusters of galaxies that are spinning around themselves, and so this thing just keeps expanding out, and that's why you look like you have a continual spreading of space. But it is literally just straightforward physics that tells you that the closer it is, the faster it moves away, and the further it is, the slower it moves away. And again, 20,000 miles, just a mere 20,000 miles, is a big difference in gravitational pull and erosion.
So no, the closer two objects are, the stronger the gravitational force is.
Yeah, and
so the more force it takes to escape,
and the higher the tidal bulge, and it's the tidal bulge that's doing it.
That's just the attraction of the moon to the Earth.
So I don't know what to say. It's just bad physics.
That's basic physics.
I mean, I don't think I have to look very far into the open literature to know that geophysicists have been scratching their heads over this problem for a long time and still don't have an explanation.
They solved it in the 90s.
I think maybe they talked about it in the 90s and decided to quit talking about it, and I don't think they solved it.
Okay.
So anyway, well, I'll move on. We're talking about age of the Earth. One of the things that's always interesting to talk about is fossils and fossil assemblages and stuff like this. And I never got to this in my presentation. I had more slides and some extra stuff to cover. But anyway, one of the things that I found very interesting is, people are always talking about this Cambrian rabbit idea, which I think is just insane. Rabbits don't live in the bottom of the ocean floor, so why you want them buried with horseshoe crabs, I don't know. But anyway, talk about out-of-place fossils in general. One of the most dynamic out-of-place fossils, which is far worse than the Cambrian rabbit, is there's a place called Roraima Formation. It's in Argentina, where angiosperm pollens have been discovered. And it's such an eyesore for the evolutionary paradigm that pretty much nobody talks about it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to do any experiments to see. They just say, oh, contamination, rework, whatever, and basically just reject it out of hand without actually looking at the evidence. So I think things like that, not to mention there's also been some reports in some of the older literature that get completely ignored. All you have to do is come up with a story about reworking or contamination and say, poof, I've solved the problem. But if you actually go out and on site and look at where this stuff is found, you would not come to these conclusions. But insect legs have also been found in areas like this. And so the Roraima Formation is actually supposedly a little over 1 billion years. Compared to the Cambrian explosion, which was roughly 500 million years ago. So it's almost double the age of the Cambrian explosion. And so, of course, it's just, how do you get angiosperm pollen 500 years before the Cambrian explosion?
Contamination is a legitimate explanation, but I would have to look at the actual stuff. If you wanted to link that to me.
Let me see.
There's an actual study.
Yeah, there is a really good. I'm going to share my screen, Donnie, just so you can see this on screen, and I'll show you where to go look for it. And don't beat me up because I give you a creationist website, because they do actually link to some technical papers, and there's a very good article on it from Emil Sylvester, I believe. Okay, so that's it right there. Let me see if I can. Oh, where'd it go? Here you go. It basically comes from this idea right here. There's an article on creation.com called Age of the Earth. And so what they do is they give some 100 or 200 evidences. I don't remember. 101, I think, is what it is. Evidences of a young Earth, and of course, dinosaur soft tissues always comes up. But they also talk about many other things that have geological context, biological context, whatever. But anyway, if you go look here, you will easily find, it's like bullet point number 6 in their list. You'll find an article there and a link where you can go read. Or you can just go into the creation website, go into their search bar and type in Roraima, Roraima, and you'll find some very interesting articles on that, where they talk about the ideas of contamination versus let's see if I had any of that directly mentioned here. Probably not. Anyway, that article will talk directly about the ideas of contamination. One of the ideas that was brought up is, that pollen can't be in situ. It has to be contamination of some sort because it's not baked. Well, many fossils are found in igneous rock that aren't baked per se. It's actually not uncommon, but part of the problem is that none of the mainstream scientists have ever bothered to do any real world experiments to validate it or invalidate it. They just kind of ignore it and hope it goes away.
Well, as for the angiosperms, I know that there has been studies to address that. They're not just ignoring that. And the dinosaur soft tissue, the preservation has been explained by its discoverer, who is a Christian.
Actually, that's an interesting comment. I mean, not all people who call themselves Christians actually believe what the Bible says. Some of them look at it more as a, kind of a, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, kind of a philosophical type approach to life as opposed to a practical history of the world. So it's completely...
Well, everyone has disagreements about what exactly the Bible says, even within young earth creationists. As long as you believe Jesus is your savior, I'll count you as a Christian.
Okay, well, all that aside, that's not really relevant. What I wanted to get here at is the dinosaur soft tissue was actually first discovered in 1966, later, and that's in the literature, in 1977 again, then in 2001 and 2005. 2005 is, I think, the one you're referring to with Mary Schweitzer, and she did not give an explanation. Well, she gave an explanation, not the explanation. Is her explanation actually valid? Well, here's the problem. What she did was she conducted she actually said this, and I'm totally paraphrasing, but she said this kind of increases the need to do actualistic conditions. What does that mean? That's kind of a play on words more than...
Sorry, what kind of condition?
Actualistic is I believe the word she used. Either way, it sounds like what she was trying to say was how we would normally say realistic conditions. What really happened? What actually happened? However you want to say it. But what she did was she took her samples and basically created a heme, a very concentrated heme soup, condensed soup, soaked some bones in it for a long time, took them out, and I think she put them in water and set them up on a shelf and let them sit there for 2 years. Well, that's really, really misleading, because that does not at all reflect what happens in the ground. The actual tissue that was found had red blood cells with visible nuclei inside the blood cell, not on the outside. And so what she did not provide a viable explanation. She just provided basically what I'll call a placeholder for people to think about. That's really all she did.
So I have been doing some research real quick, and so this is the importance of the repeatability and testability in science. So in response to the claims of the Precambrian pollen, there were some scientists that went out and collected samples from that same claimed area, and they tested 50 samples of the same strata, which Burdick had studied and processed, and not a single example of authentic pollen grain was obtained from any of these samples. And so, yeah, that's...
Yeah, that word authentic is a little bit telling, because it sounds to me like they did find pollen, they just don't believe it was in situ pollen. They believe it was contamination.
Yeah, I don't see why a scientist couldn't conclude something like that.
So, so basically, we've talked about a number of evidences, and I'll kind of dial it back out just a little bit. So the Bible does literally, if you just take a simple face value reading of Genesis 1 through 11, all of the verbiage in there is basically past tense verbs. God said, God created, God separated. There's a number of verbs used in there. They're all past tense verbs, and it literally just, in a very straightforward, simple reading, looks like a historical narrative. And so if we believe that is an accurate account, and we go out and we look at all this evidence, we find a huge swath of evidences that are very highly consistent with that. Here on the screen, of course, I've got osteocytes, red blood cells, blood vessels, fragmented DNA, flexible nerves, Ambopteryx. I kind of threw that in there as a last minute deal because I just stumbled across it. Ambopteryx is a supposedly an early bird. They speculated that it may have had membranous wings, more like a bat than a feathered wing like a modern bird. But anyway, they also speculated that may have been soft tissue that was actually preserved, whether it was pigments or whatever. But then you also have marine worms from 550 million years ago that are flexible, just like the videos you've seen of Schweitzer stretching little pieces of dino tissue. These marine worms have the same basic deal, fossil squid ink that was able to be reconstituted. The reference here to flexible nerves, that's what this purple picture is. Soft flexible nerves found in Triceratops bone at 25 micrometers. Anyway, super small with the original structure still visible. Anyway, the point is that all this stuff is highly consistent with a 6,000-year-old Earth, and most of the explanations proffered are like the Schweitzer explanation. Oh, we'll boil it in some condensed soup and kind of pretend that's an actualistic condition. I think that's stretching the imagination.
So the reason people would do things in like purified manners in the lab is to eliminate variables. So you just want to see if the heme can create this kind of effect. And I would say that this, if we're throwing out the mechanism of preservation, if that's plausible, I wouldn't say that this is consistent with 6,000-year-old Earth. Well, I mean, when was the flood? 4,000 years ago?
44 roughly, yeah.
There's still no reason that soft tissue is going to be able to be preserved over 4,000 years. That really doesn't.
Well, I mean, that's not a bad point. To be honest with you, soft tissue probably caught almost all the creationists off guard a little bit too. But one of the highlights here that is almost never mentioned in this discussion is that when you talk about experimental, eliminating variables and all that kind of stuff, a huge amount of experimentation went into determining life expectancies of various types of tissues. And then when this stuff was discovered, they kind of just threw all that information out the window and said, oh, wait, maybe that was all wrong. Maybe the experiments we did don't really tell us anything. Well, that's not really very good science, because that is exactly the kind of science you would use if you were wanting to know how long your meat should last in the supermarket grocers, at the supermarket. It's exactly what you want to know. But probably the bigger point is that most of the numbers that are given for that are under extremely idealized conditions with very low temperatures and very stable, because one of the problems is in temperatures is changing temperature is actually worse than just about anything. So even at low temperatures, if the temperature fluctuates up and down, it accelerates the decay. But the problem, of course, is that this stuff is found in like Hell Creek, Montana. It's called Hell Creek for a reason, because it's kind of hot down there sometimes. And not to mention, a lot of these fossils are actually found very near the surface. As a matter of fact, I read an account where somebody had gone out and found a Triceratops horn fragment, and the way they described finding it was they basically, instead of how you normally think of a chisel and a hammer and kind of pecking out some hard rock, they literally just scraped away sediments with their hands because it was so soft, and they were able to just pull it right out. That's extremely open to contamination, weathering, that kind of thing.
Was it mineralized?
No, it wasn't mineralized.
It was just bone.
It was soft tissue. It was
partially. Horn isn't soft tissue.
Well, I when I say, I mean original tissue in general. But as I understand it, that one may have been partially permineralized on the outside, but it definitely had soft tissue inside of it. But the point is that we're not talking about idealistic conditions. We're talking about very hostile conditions, which makes the evolutionary timeline just so much more difficult to grasp.
Well, hostile conditions are going to rot flesh either way. So in either case, there's going to have to be a preservation method, whether it's ice or some kind of chemical method. And environments change, obviously. no matter where you stand on man-made climate change, the climate does change, whether it's cyclical or not. So, and the it's not like it's just a hunk of meat. These are like hard body parts and remnants, that need to be processed in order to actually be soft. These are basically the shell of the cell, or impressions of blood vessels, and some collagen that needs to be reconstituted. Um, Hard parts like from crustaceans are going to preserve much more easily, but
So
it's not fresh meat by any means.
You gotta appreciate the irony though, because you're basically arguing that there is some preservation method that randomly happens in nature that makes soft tissue last for 65 plus million years, but yet you can't get meat in the grocery store to last more than a couple of weeks.
Well, it's still there. It's not edible. It's infested with bacteria. But
well, the point is though that it's that uniformitarian extrapolation. You would think you could use it here and say, oh well, I don't necessarily expect the meat to stay edible for 65 million years, but come on, it should stay edible for 2-3 weeks easily, a month. Come on, that's nothing.
Yeah, it's definitely not fresh meat. Nothing close to fresh meat. It's barely even noticeable, like a microscopic scale. But
have you
that's
seen
one of the problems with when you bring up uniformitarian, there is really no consensus on how long it takes for the base proteins to degrade, because we haven't really witnessed total decay of the basic building blocks like collagen proteins. We don't actually know how long it takes for them to decay without something consuming it like a living thing.
Yeah.
Well, let me jump in here, gentlemen. That is actually a couple minutes over on the discussion time. We did about 22 minutes for the first kind of round of the discussion, and then the same thing for the second round. So time has flown by. We are at 2 hours and 11 minutes. So before we go to the closing statements, though, I don't want to just kind of cut you guys off mid-thought. Why don't we take 30 seconds? We can start with you, Snake. 30 seconds just to kind of wrap up your thoughts in terms of the discussion, any final points you quickly wanted to make. Then we'll do the same thing for T-Rock, and then we'll go right into closing statement. So go ahead, Snake.
Yeah, I think if there's a mechanism that can preserve something for 4,000 years, I'm not sure why we can't have that mechanism keep going for longer. So, yeah, I guess I'll leave the rest for the closing.
Sure, no problem. I appreciate that, guys. Thanks for a fantastic discussion and very easy to moderate. You're both cordial, easygoing, and kept it really equally timed. So I appreciate that. T-Rock, final thoughts, final points in terms of the discussion.
So yeah, on that last point about extending a 4,000-year preservation to a 65 million preservation, in engineering and mathematics, there are mathematical models that you develop, and so there are different ways to go about doing that. Two basic categories you can think of is the uniformitarian model, where you take something like a decay rate of a radioisotope, whatever. And it has a fairly simple equation with just a single term on one side and a single, it's not a single term, but it's a composite term on the other side. Anyway, there's only two pieces to the equation, one on each side of the equal sign. And that's a very uniformitarian approach. In engineering, though, there is another principle called piecewise functions, where you basically have to break things out into a bunch of different terms that are separate from each other, because each term represents a different time frame. And so the only reason in engineering that we use a more uniformitarian approach is because of simplicity. And we can verify the results in real time and not just assume that because our math looks good, that the results are also going to look good. As a matter of fact, the exact opposite is usually true. That's why we build prototypes and stuff like that. So anyway, point is, that type of extrapolation does not work in real world engineering. There's a reason for that. So you have no consequences saying, grass evolved 300 million years ago or 100 million years ago or a billion years. You have no consequence of getting that wrong. It's not going to change whether your cell phone works. But in the real world, you have to confirm your calculations in real time to know that it actually did work.
All right, I appreciate those final words in terms of the discussion, T-Rock. So now we're going to move into closing statements, and as we agreed at the beginning, looks like we'll have T-Rock give his 5-minute concluding statement first. Then we'll give 5 minutes to Snake, and then we'll get through some of these audience questions. So T-Rock, whenever you're ready, my good man, just let me know, and we can start the timer.
Okay, I'm ready. Yeah, so I'll real quick, I'll buzz back through the heat problem. I don't think it's near the problem people make it out to be. I will readily concede that there's so much unknown about it. But you cannot ignore the fact that accelerated decay may have been a necessary feature of the creation week and possibly a necessary feature of the flood. And so where does that energy go into? Nobody knows because you don't know what the initial conditions are. Having said that, any particular model, if you reject any model because you don't have all the answers, well, evolution was out a long time ago and is still out. So no, we don't have to pretend we understand everything, but we do have to allow for a few realistic scenarios where accelerated nuclear decay energy was necessary to do something in creation and or the flood. So beyond that, the huge array of evidences for a young Earth, you can find them anywhere you want to look. It doesn't matter. Look in recorded history. You can't go back more than 4,000 or 5,000 years in recorded history before you just quit. And like the very earliest languages, for example, are extremely complex. There is no sign that they develop slowly and gradually from little scribblings on a rock or something like that. They start out extremely complex, just like the Bible implies they should. But anyway, it doesn't matter which venue you want to go into. It can be geology, it can be paleontology, it can be biology, it can be written history. Doesn't matter. You will find very strong evidences in virtually every single venue of science for a recent creation in an Earth that has not been here very long. So one of the points that I always like to make is that age itself. So there are, we didn't really talk about this much, but there's two basic concepts in age, and one of them is an absolute age and the other one's relative age. So generally speaking, we would say as creationists, we would say that the secular scientists are fairly decent at the relative ages of things. A happened before B and B happened before C, that kind of thing. But their absolute ages are way off the mark. And there's evidences all over the world to suggest that would be the case. But one of the points I like to make is if you take something like a pencil, something as simple as this, there is not a single chemical physical test you can do on this pencil to tell you how old it is. Not one. There is nothing that you can determine the age of in an absolute sense without some sort of eyewitness reference to know that you are correct. Age is not something that can be measured. You can attempt to calculate it, but as we've already pointed out, attempting to calculate dates on rocks of known ages is just an exercise in futility, really, nothing else. But I think that's pretty much it for me. I think I'll leave it there and hopefully get a little more time in the queue.
All right, I appreciate that concluding statement there, T-Rock, and we'll hand it over to Taylor. Taylor, you also have up to 5 minutes. Whenever you're ready, again, just make sure you unmute yourself and you're good to go.
All right, so let's see. I didn't see any real rebuttal to the heat problem. We went over some things that don't seem to be actual rebuttals. So basically, like, we went over how much heat would occur. Let's assume that maybe the heat was creating heavy elements. It's still, or the radioactive decay. that's they're getting lighter, but that still wouldn't get rid of the heat. So we kind of just have hand waving going on there. And we had some final thoughts about absolute dating. It was mentioned that there was like no context for the absolute dating, and we just sit down and calculate. Or I think he said we don't just sit down and calculate, and then he did. It's a little bit of both. So, and cross confirmation, he's right, is not done on everything, but it has been done, and there's been overlap. So the fact that that exists is cross confirmation. That is basically proof of the concept. So after we get that down, we don't have to do it every time because we know it works. As long as we know we're getting our math right, we know that it's at least more reliable than a religious book. Yeah, and there was some speculation that daughter products can just be created simultaneously. I don't see why there's any reason to put speculation over actual observations. There might be some process that we haven't observed that we don't know of yet, but you can't go off of anything that we haven't observed. So that's where we're at. Scientific method just can only deal with observations. You can speculate with the scientific method, but of course you have to test those speculations for it to be anything more than a hypothesis. So I think there was maybe some confusion with the moon's recession and the moon's orbit speed. Let's see. But no matter how you slice it, the physicists have calculated that it would never approach the Roche limit and collide into the Earth. Some of the things mentioned about population problems that I don't think we really got to talk about much. He said that there were the predators would be outnumbered by the herbivores. That's certainly going to happen, but the predators are going to increase in their population as food supplies increase. This is why human populations increase the way we're seeing is because of food supplies. In the past, our populations were kept low because of the food supply. As soon as the food supply started increasing, so did our population. So it's a self-limiting system. You can't grow your population past the amount that you can feed your population. So it doesn't matter. Rabbits could be multiplying like tribbles and just exponentially just dividing hundreds of times a minute. It wouldn't matter. They'd run out of food eventually, and their population would collapse into a stable number where they could feed themselves. Or they'd go completely extinct. The other problem is 2 rabbits off the ark. I think that the actual biblical estimate was, what was it, 4 or 6 of the clean animals? But it doesn't really matter. So at
20 seconds.
Okay, so at that low level of population, you are going to have genetic entropy. It's not called that, but you're going to have mutational meltdown with that level of extreme incest. So none of those populations could survive.
All righty, perfect timing. And did I hear you say genetic entropy, Snake?
You did. It is a thing with very low populations.
Well, I appreciate it, Taylor and T-Rock. Fantastic debate. I got to say, we are going on 2.5 hours, and therefore, did either of you need a restroom break before we get into the questions, or are we good?
I'm good.
Nope.
Okay. You guys got good endurance. So, yeah, why don't we just get right into the questions then? We've got some solid questions, as we usually do on this channel. Whoever the question is for, we'll make sure they get the last word. Let's say the question's for T-Rock. He can respond. Snake can add a few points. And then T-Rock will get the last word. So here we go, all the way back to the beginning. While you were off screen, T-Rock, we got through one question, so we're going to kind of skip that one and get to the next. And this one comes in from George Bond. George Bond has a question for SWR. Snake was right. So he says, secular erosion rates indicate erosion that would result in the land being flattened to sea level in 10 to 12 million years. Why do we still find fossils, and why believe the geological column?
Well, the geological column is there, but I think that's assuming erosion without deposition rate. So erosion can, we know erosion can, I don't know what you call it, it can outstrip, it can go faster than the deposition rate sometimes, and other times the deposition rate is higher than the erosion rate. And
All right.
Sometimes that's just how it goes.
All right, I appreciate it. T-Rock, anything you wanted to add to that?
Sure. Just a shout out to George. I know you don't know who I am, but I like your passion, and thank you. So this is a real simple physics concept in erosion, and that is E equals 1/2 mv squared. That's not Einstein's relativity. Of course, that's the Newtonian version. It's the 1/2, and the fact that the velocity is typically much lower than the speed of light. But E equals 1/2 mv squared explains a ton of things in the real world. And so that m, when you talk about erosion, you basically have to compare the mass of air to the mass of water. So water falling down and gravity of erosional sediments falling down, the energy level is much higher than the wind is able to do because the wind's mass is so low. So it's a completely valid observation to say, hey, why haven't the continents eroded flat by now? As a matter of fact, most continental coastlines are getting smaller and smaller. People have problems all over the world, from building a house too close to the shoreline and then finding out that, oh no, the shoreline's creeping in on my property, kind of thing. So totally valid observation.
I appreciate that response. T-Rock, question was for you, Taylor, so you can have the last word.
I think, no, we can move on.
All right, perfect. So this one comes in from Jackson Rowe. And what I'll start doing, gentlemen, is putting it up on screen for you guys just to have a look for yourself. So here we go. Jackson Rowe. Question for, doesn't specify, I'm guessing it's for you though, T-Rock. So he says, why do all meteorites come to an age of about 4 to 4.5 billion years with multiple radiometric methods?
I think that's a bit of a misconception. So in scientific literature, there are basically two sets of data. Any scientist that's honest will tell you this. There's data that you collect, and then there's data that you report. They're not always the same. As a matter of fact, I would say a lot of times they're not the same. Why? Because you throw out anomalies that you think don't belong, and then you come up with some justification. Go, oh, well, I think contamination, or oh, I think some weird thing happened, and I just need to throw it out because it doesn't make sense. In reality, and his question says multiple radiometric methods. Actually, the age of the Earth determined by the moon rocks that I alluded to earlier, you actually get a broad range of dates out of that moon rock. They're not commonly talked about, and it's basically just pick the one you think makes the most sense. That's it.
I appreciate that response, T-Rock, and I appreciate the question, Jackson Rowe. Snake, anything you wanted to add to that? Any points you wanted to make?
Well, I would say, it's the reason why is because they're cross-confirming that they're that old, and the distinction between data you collect and data you report you can report data you've collected, but it's probably just the difference between data that's kind of extrapolated. Like you have the data you collect, this amount of parent and daughter isotope. You do the calculations and then you report it. So both perfectly legitimate to report.
Thank you. T-Rock, question was for you. You get the last word.
So I will say that let's take the high ground for just a moment and say, okay, let's assume for the sake of argument that the stated claim is correct for 4.5 billion years with multiple radiometric dating methods. Again, I find that hugely unlikely with the naturalistic explanation of the origins of heavier elements because of the reasons I described earlier. The temperature, pressure, ionization gradient, blah, 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 should be creating some of this stuff already. And it's largely just completely ignored and not even talked about. But having said all that, in the creation model, it actually makes more sense that an omnipotent God creates 100% pure parent isotope because he wants the heat to create other processes. One of the points I didn't mention earlier was that, I think I breezed over it, but it's an endothermic process, which means it takes huge amounts of energy to create the heavier elements. And so where did that energy come from? Accelerated decay is a plausible explanation. And so with that, universe-wide accelerated decay, so that no matter where you are in the universe, you see the same appearance of accelerated decay.
Well, we know that it wouldn't be the same accelerated rate because each layer has different rates.
Go ahead, T-Rock.
And each decay species has a different accelerated rate to kind of make them conform with each other.
So I know we disagreed on this point earlier, but I will stick to my guns and say that accelerated decay has been done in a laboratory environment. And one of the trends that you get out of it is that longer half-life isotopes tend to accelerate faster. And then when you get into the shorter ones, they accelerate slower. So you can see kind of a correlation from, long half-life isotopes down to short half-life isotopes. So it to me, it totally makes sense that you see some sort of normalized pattern.
All right, let's move to the next question. I appreciate the engaging Q&A here. So we got some great questions and great responses from you guys. So this next one comes in from Iron Matt, one of our faithful members. I appreciate it, Matt. So he says, question for Snake. What is Snake's take on the moon getting farther from the Earth problem for deep time? I understand you guys discussed that in the discussion portion for quite a bit, but this came in, before that. So yeah, Snake, go ahead.
Well, I mean, we discussed that. So, my take. I know that there's been several papers. I think I'll have to look back on it and learn the technical aspects of it, but I've read papers, I've seen several more papers I haven't read that basically address this problem directly, and there's no problem with the math. So,
all right, thank you for the response there, Snake. T-Rock, go ahead if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, so Taylor kind of mentioned a solution from the 90s, I think is what he said earlier. One of the proposed solutions, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, was that tidal locking of the moon. In other words, it may have actually rotated on its own axis at one point and then got tidally locked to the Earth, so we only see one face of it all the time, and that absorbed a bunch of the energy, blah, blah, blah. But you can see the obvious problem with that. It's kind of twofold. One of them is that it's just complete storytelling. For one, there's absolutely no way to test that. And the other problem is that you do have differential cratering on one side versus the other. And if the moon had been spinning in the early Earth billions of years ago, if it had been spinning at one time and had become tidally locked, two things arise. One is that the amount of debris floating in our solar system would have been much higher and much less concentrated in bands than what it is today, which means that any spinning at all in the early solar system and the early Earth-Moon system would cause it to be cratered pretty much equally all the way around because of the randomization of impacts. But that's not at all what we see. Instead, we see that all the debris as we see it today is separated into more or less neat bands, not totally neat. You get some random stuff occasionally, but point is that what we see today is consistent with the young Earth because we don't expect the debris to have ever just been randomly crashing into the moon. But you should absolutely expect that in a naturalistic paradigm.
So as long as there are physically plausible solutions, there's no reason to assume that the young Earth creation model is the only explanation, since there are other plausible explanations. But yeah, I don't think that there's any reason to ignore things like the heat problem, which don't have plausible explanations, just because we didn't physically witness the moon, even though there are several plausible explanations for how it got here.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. So the next question that comes in is from Cool Jesus. Thank you for the question, Cool Jesus. He says, question for T-Rock. Do you accept the relative dating of rocks in the column that Andrew Snelling and other young Earth creationist geologists have recently confirmed at the ICC 2020?
The short answer is sometimes. I mean, you'd have to be a little more specific, and I'm a detailed guy, so I would like to actually look at the rocks to see if I think I would agree with what they say. But generally speaking, I said earlier, and I don't retract this at all, but I did say earlier that when it comes to relative dating, most creationists tend to agree more or less with the uniformitarian model on relative dating. It's the absolute ages that we think they're way off kilter on. But having said that, there is a big caveat, and that is the way you think of layers in the geological column. So relative, you have to kind of break it down, and you have to think about processes. So in uniformitarian model, you don't think of, it's not that you don't think of processes, but you relate every single strata in the column to time. And in a proper creation model, my take is that you don't think of it in time, you think of it in process. Now, time is an element of a process, but the utter uniformity of any given layer, where you see nothing but the exact same sandstone for meters upon meters upon meters, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of meters, that's not at all indicative of a time laden process. It's indicative of something much different. And so do I agree with Snelling? There are several models out there, and this is going to kind of touch on post-flood boundary. Anyway, maybe the greater point for this particular question is probably that when you look at layers, multiple layers can be laid down simultaneously. And because uniformitarians think of them as being laid down sequentially over time, and I'm saying that's an improper way to look at it, because actually in real flume experiments, they're laid down horizontally, not vertically. So relative dating that they give, maybe you have to make some dividing lines in there, not just, hand wave it all to one kind of process did everything. So I don't know if I can really expound any better than that, but I think it's a highly subjective idea to assign relative dating across the board.
Well, I appreciate the thorough answer there, T-Rock, and a good question. Snake, anything you wanted to add?
Well, along the lines of layers being needing to form quickly, well, we know that, for example, the limestone, it would be physically impossible for it to form at any rate faster than about 100,000 years. So, and that's just the thinnest part of one layer. And environments change, so I think that accounts for different mineral composition. Processes may tend to be the same for a long time and then change. So I don't see a problem there.
All right, and before you give your last word, T-Rock, he gave a shout out to George Bond earlier. He gives a super chat. I appreciate the support. George, that will cover my Friday night pizza. Me and George both share a love for pizza. So he says T-Rock rocks. He says thanks for the shout out. So
thanks, George. Of course, it's God's world. He's the one that did it all. So we just get to enjoy the fruits of it. So anyway, last word on that particular question. Where was I going to go with that? Oh, processes in time. Whenever you hear a skeptic say it must take so much time to do a certain process, they kind of end up having to eat their words over and over and over on that. Two things emerge from that. Number one, you can look at things like diamonds, coal, fossils, oil, opals, rubies, you name it. If you want to make them quickly in a lab, you can find a way. There are methods to do those kinds of things. We've been indoctrinated for so long that all these things take so much time, and because they've just pounded it into the textbooks for decades now. But of course, when you want it to happen fast, you can make it. You can find the circumstances that make it happen fast, and I don't suppose limestone is going to be any different. The other thing that emerges from that is that typically what I find very common in secular science is that whenever they do an experiment, well, and to be fair, some of it really is a matter of practicality. You can't test every single circumstance, every single combination of physical characteristics and events and whatever. But they tend to have a very narrow scope of what they think they should test. So in the limestone, I'm supposing that probably what they're actually doing is saying, oh, must be a calm, placid sea under this temperature. It must sit there, and then that's how they do their experiment. And then they go, oh, see, it takes thousands of years per inch or whatever. In reality, they haven't run the full gauntlet of physical scenarios that could produce thick layers of limestone.
Well, there are no known natural processes you can do that. You could obviously find some artificial laboratory methods of making pretty much any material, but they have tested turbulent, hot oceans from the whole gamut down to the cold, calm waters, or is it warm, calm waters? Anyway, those conditions were found to be the ideal conditions because they tested the whole range of conditions.
Go ahead, T-Rock. You can have the last word.
Oh, I had a thought, and it kind of slipped my mind here, but I'm going to say no. That's almost certainly not going to be true for 100% of what you really need to know. It's just it's science. It's slow. It really is. And like I said, there's very practical reasons for not being overly exasperative in your experiments and stuff. But like I said, if you thought you needed a way to do it, you would find a way. And when you say, this was the thought I was kind of stumbling across, when you say there are no naturalistic processes, that's just question begging. You're literally saying, see, it took that long because it's in nature, but how do you actually demonstrate that? You can't. Nobody lives long enough to see a process take 10,000 years. So it's just circular reasoning and question begging.
Well, as far as we know, that's how long it takes. Science always leaves the door open for new information, and that's the point. We assume natural conditions, and we don't assume miracles and that there's a giant alien or a god using the earth as a laboratory. That wouldn't be science.
All right, to be fair, since it was T-Rock's question, real quick final word, okay. T-Rock, then we'll get on to the next.
That was just another exercise in circular reasoning, so yeah.
All right, guys, good back and forth. So this one comes in from Sunflower, $5 super chat. I appreciate the support, Sunflower. This one is for you, Snake. So he asks, what if the ice mass of Antarctica was way more than it is now, and the heat from the accelerated decay went into that ice and melted it into water? What are your thoughts, Snake?
Well, then it would still, the heat would still boil off about 20 times more water than that, if not more.
I appreciate it. T-Rock, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, as a creationist, I'm personally, I'm fully, like I said, I don't invoke miracles of any sort unless the Bible gives you a specific reason to, and I really believe that any perceived heat problem is a feature of either creation week or initiating the flood, one of those two. And so, most creationist mainstream view is that the ice age was a product, it was an aftermath of the flood. So the heat had already been dissipated in whatever form it needed to be before the ice age came.
Thank you, T-Rock. Snake, quick final word.
Well, that sounds like question begging. Just going with the assumption and ending with the assumption.
Oh, you guys are coming at each other with the fallacies. I like it. I like it. So here we go. Next one comes in from Pseudonym. $5 super chat. Question for both. So he asks, do you agree with the out of Africa theory? How would you relate it to the age of the world via human speciation / population that did not come into contact? I guess the last question was snakes, I believe. So we could have T-Rock start here if you'd like to.
Okay, so how would you relate it to the age of the world, the human speciation population that didn't come into contact? Okay, so do I agree with out of Africa theory? No. It looks to me like a just kind of a way to circumvent biblical history that's much more sound in origins of man. So in the biblical chronology, after the flood, shortly thereafter, you have the Tower of Babel, which is in the Middle East, not in Africa. And one of the things that happened there, of course, is that it was shut down very quickly and people were scattered. So the larger populations did grow out of Africa, i.e. in Egypt. So could that kind of give an allusion to the idea that human history started in Africa? Maybe, but again, it's written history, and so to the idea of circular reasoning based on, it's not circular reasoning at all to agree with written history. It's what you do when you want to know who the first president of the United States was. It's what you do when you want to know when Mount Vesuvius erupted. I mean, written history is what you start with. It's not at all circular reasoning. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. T-Rock, Snake, anything you wanted to add? Well, I guess it's a question for both. So go ahead. Your turn.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it would be the case that a modern type human evolved in Africa and walked out into the Middle East and spread from there. It seems like near human ancestors and cousins came out of Africa and spread up into Europe, probably Asia, because there were the Neanderthals in Europe, mixed with humans. But in general, the hominid species came out of Africa and radiated through the Middle East to Europe and Asia, etc. And how would I'm not sure how to answer the other part of the question. How would I relate it to the age of the world? Recent compared to the age of the world? I'm not sure if that's what Pseudonym wanted.
No, I think it was good responses from the both of you. I appreciate it. Pseudonym did send in another question in the form of a super chat. I appreciate the support. This one is just specifically for you, T-Rock. So it's up on screen. I'm reading it word for word. He said, what sand? How did it end up in desert land? I guess to reword it, maybe he's wondering how you explain desert. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's pretty widely understood across all of mainstream science that virtually every square inch of the planet has been underwater at some point. And so when you actually look at the desert sands in say the Middle East, what you really find out is that used to be a very lush place. There are fossils in there, the marine fossils among others. There is evidence of a much more moderate climate in the past. Same for the desert sands of Africa. And so to insinuate that the sand is the product of a pure Aeolian desert is just, it's absurd even on the face of uniformitarian thought.
Thank you for the answer, T-Rock. Snake, anything you wanted to add real quick?
Well, I think maybe the implication might be that the sand got there because it was eroded and from some other layer and then moved over either underwater or from wind. So maybe the implication is that it could relate somehow to how conditions will change. Some type of rock will erode, blow over, move, or flow over to some other area and create distinct layers like that.
Thank you, Snake. Final word there, T-Rock.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't mean to altogether be dismissive of the question or anything, but I will point out to his point maybe that in desert sands, so the difference between wind erosion and water erosion, you'll end up with two different abrasion profiles and edging profiles of the grains. True enough, but that doesn't. Part of it is some of this stuff can happen chemically and leave you with no idea whatsoever of what the origin of the initial erosion was caused by. True enough. But having said that, how many feet of sand do you have in the Middle East or in Africa, and how close to the surface are so many fossils found? The answer is there's a huge amount of fossil stuff, and it's very close to the surface. So that is highly indicative that the original erosion was indeed water, and whatever 4,000 years worth of wind abrasion that you get can kind of obscure it. But the bottom line is you're going to have to defer to the fact that you got so many fossils in it.
I appreciate it. This next question again is for you, T-Rock. Looks like we've had a good, healthy balance of questions for the both of you tonight. Lots of good questions from the audience. So this question comes in from Luca Medugno, who will be here in 2 days debating the film free on the feasibility of of Noah's Ark. So Luca, I appreciate your question. He asks, we can get the radiometric dating to the calendar year of Mount Vesuvius eruption when Pompeii was destroyed. How so if the method is not working, T-Rock?
Okay, so that word radiometric is very generic, and so we are not talking about potassium argon, we're not talking about uranium lead, we're not talking about rubidium strontium. None of those would give you an age down to the year. The one radiometric method that might would be carbon-14. And so here's the interesting thing about carbon-14. Now, two things out of this question that you have to recognize. Number one, how did you know you got it to within a year? You know it from written historical records. That's how you know. Otherwise, you wouldn't. You'd just be going, oh, well, maybe it's correct. If the records weren't clear enough, you might have a little bit of guesswork, but you would only know if you got it to the year is if you had good historical records to tell you that. So the method is valid in carbon-14, but there's a trick about carbon-14 too that we haven't really talked about, and that is that there's a calibration curve. I talked about piecewise mathematical modeling earlier, and carbon-14 is one of those examples, because what you do is you have to recognize that carbon-14 buildup in the atmosphere is non-linear, and so you have to kind of do some extrapolation on that, plus you have to combine it with the fact that detonation of nuclear bomb testing and all that kind of stuff can alter the amount of carbon-14. Anyway, the point is that events can happen in the world that change the ratio of carbon-12 and carbon-14. So it is, again, it is a valid method, but it has to have some sort of geological or archaeological context to confirm it against.
Thank you, T-Rock, for the thorough answer. Snake, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that we know a lot of the limitations of these testing methods, and the fact that carbon-14 content basically correlates to the amount of carbon in the atmosphere at the time, you would need, it's probably not going to be linear at all times. You would need to have variable rates or variable conditions. So, but the method was proven. They obviously can figure out what kind of things they need to adjust for. And yeah, we know the limitations of a lot of this stuff. And obviously we're always open to learn new limitations, but we can only go with the information we have at the time.
Thank you for the response there, Snake. And T-Rock, final word?
Yeah, no, he basically reiterated what I said. That is, you perform the test, you compare it to a known geological or archaeological context, and that's how you know whether to make an adjustment or not. In the story.
All right, gentlemen.
Well,
so we've got. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, if that's kind of the process of learning how it works. But once you have your methods down, the method is kind of the method is proven at that point. So you can use these cross confirmation methods, and then moving on, you know that the method is sound. You don't have to cross confirm every single time you test every single thing, because you already know what methods get you to the accuracy in the first place.
And T-Rock, final word. Question was for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, put that to the test on, some other context besides carbon-14 dating. Nothing I've said is at all disputed in mainstream literature. But put it to the test on what I talked about, the moon rocks. How did you verify that? How do you even know? Like I said, they literally did get multiple responses on dates from those moon rocks, and they just picked one. But how do they know whether they picked the right one or not? There's no geological context to compare it to other than, we found it, off of the planet Earth.
Well, that's why you take multiple samples and test it multiple times with multiple different methods and multiple different labs. So generally a trend emerges.
I would agree. A trend emerges, and the trend is that you can actually get future dates from some of these exercises, and you can get bizarre old dates that don't make any sense in the uniformitarian view either. So yeah, a trend emerges, and that is that if you had to be as reliant on those dates as you have to be in, say, structural engineering, you would never let evolution storytelling fly, because it wouldn't.
Well, the trend eliminates those anomalies like future dates and things like that.
Battle of the final words on this one. Who's going to get it? Who's going to get it?
I'll let it go. I think I made one point.
All right, here we go. So what we'll do, because the timer went off a few minutes ago, it's been a great audience Q&A. We've got questions forever. So what I'll have to do is just kind of wind it down with these last two questions. They are super chats. So I got to make sure I get the super chats in, and apologies to anybody whose question we didn't get to, but it's been a great Q&A, and we're about to hit the 3-hour mark. So, I want to be respective of the time of the debaters. So this one comes in from Sunflower, another super chat. I appreciate it. He says, question for Snake was right. This is kind of bouncing off of what you guys discussed earlier with Sunflower's previous question. He says, whatever the amount of ice is, why isn't it viable that there was way more ice and it absorbed the heat from the accelerated decay and melted?
So taking in just the kinetic energy from subduction, the friction, and just the decay series of uranium, not including any other decay series, we would boil off 300%, 400% ocean given over 25 times over. So let's assume on top of that the entire Earth had an ice crust that was as big as 4 times the ocean. it would still boil. It would still have left like 20 times. You could still boil off that amount of water 20 more times. So, and that's the low, super low estimate of heat.
Thank you for the response, Snake. Anything you wanted to add, T-Rock?
Yeah, I'll be brief. In concept, of course, the ice can absorb some heat. True enough. So I don't want to be altogether dismissive, but but to have that much ice, you have to have some kind of geophysical mechanism that makes it possible to have that much ice. And as far as I'm aware, there are no creation models that would put that much ice either before or during the flood. Most of the models that I'm aware of that are taken seriously would say that the ice age started about 100 years or so after the flood and lasted about 500 to 700 years. So as far as being a mechanism to absorb heat from radiation, it just doesn't fit any of the current creation models. But besides all that, the idea that there's so much heat that it would just evaporate and all just still, again, completely ignores the fact that you may need some of the accelerated decay to even create the Earth in the beginning, and you may need some accelerated decay to initiate the flood. So that's where I think the majority of the heat, or almost all the heat, went.
Well, even if you need the heat to create the Earth and initiate the flood, that doesn't get rid of the heat.
All right, so here is the final question. This is another question from Pseudonym, another super chat. I appreciate it, Pseudonym. So this time it is for you, Snake. He asks, if carbon-14 dating has a half-life of 6,000 years, how do you date anything more than, let's say, 12,000 years without saying carbon-14 dating / isotopes?
Well, this seems to be a misunderstanding of how half-lives work. So if you have a half-life of 6,000 and you have 2 rounds of 6,000, so 12,000, you're not going to have 0 of your sample left. You're going to have a quarter of it left, because after 6,000 years, half of it is left. So then after the next 6,000 years, half of that is left. So you'd have a quarter left. Next half-life, you'd have an eighth left. So each round of the half-life, you're only losing half of it. It's not half now and then half later, because it's half of what's left each time, if that makes sense. But carbon dating is not accurate. Even like with the most accurate equipment, maybe you can get up to like 30,000 years.
Anything you wanted to add, T-Rock?
Yeah, there's a just a quick comment on carbon dating in general. There's a phrase that they use that's a little bit telling if you pay attention, and that is they will sometimes refer to what they call carbon years, as opposed to real calendar years, and that is because it's well understood that attempting to carbon date something again has to have a geological context of some sort, as nobody believes there would be an archaeological context past about 6,000 to 8,000 years maximum by secular reasoning. So other than that, as far as the method itself goes, Taylor kind of touched on it, and that is that the half-life thing, when you're counting actual isotopes of carbon-14, you can accurately count them out to about 50 to 70,000 carbon years. So 12,000, not really a big deal. Of course, that doesn't at all address the huge anomaly with all the carbon-14 that's in diamonds and coal and pretty much everything else that's of biological origin or otherwise. Diamonds aren't actually biological origin that I'm aware of, but anyway, it just kind of highlights the problem with how you perceive dating methods and their accuracy.
Go ahead, Snake. You get the final word.
Well, I would address that, at least from what I've read, the claims about diamond contamination with carbon was actually lab contamination. It was from the equipment.
All right. Guys, we did it. We are over the 3-hour mark. Great endurance from the both of you. Fantastic technical discussion. You guys came in with a lot of good points and arguments. I appreciate it. Thanks again for a great debate. Before we shut it down, though, as we like to do, final thoughts, final words from the debaters, T-Rock and Snake. Why don't we start with you, T-Rock? This was technically your first time here on the channel. And thanks again for giving us your time. Yeah, go ahead. Final words, final thoughts.
Yeah, real quick. I want to apologize again for the blunder earlier on the share screen thing. It's just bizarre. I hate to have wasted everybody's time like that, but stuff happens anyway. Thank you, Taylor, again for joining the discussion. I know that I'm a bit resolute sometimes in my comments, but I truly do hope that I'm not coming across as disrespectful or demeaning in any way. It's just that, you have to employ real physics and real logic. And so I tend to be a little bit resolute in those things. But either way, it's been a great discussion. I appreciate everything. Thank you, Donnie, for hosting us. Just a quick idea that I thought you might be interested in. Maybe you can take a poll and see what other people think. But I think it'd be a great debate to have engineering background versus engineering background on whether life is designed on the Earth. Two engineering perspectives that are diametrically opposed. So anyway, with that, I am done with my commentary. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I think that's a great idea. Definitely want to have you both back on for 2022. We want to make 2022 even bigger and better than 2021. So we are always open to new topic ideas. So I appreciate the final words. T-Rock, we'll hand it over to you, Taylor. Thanks again for doing this. Final words, final thoughts. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the debate. Definitely one of the more cordial events, enjoyable. Yeah, I've done this topic about 3 times in a row now, so maybe something something new next time.
Something novel.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, guys. You made for a cordial, intellectual debate. I appreciate you both giving us over 3 hours of your time. T-Rock, I appreciate you giving us not one opening statement, but 2. So you guys have deserved and earned a night off now. So I appreciate it. Thank you to the audience as well. Thank you for all your questions, comments, super chats, and super stickers. We'll see you in a couple nights for the feasibility of Noah's Ark between Luca and the Film Free. So until then, standing for truth,